Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, you didn't sleep very much this weekend. Was it worth it?
It's never worth it. It's never worth it.
It's never worth it, and yet you continue to behave in this way. You continue to take media appearances at like 5 a.m.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. That happened.
That is a thing. That is also why, I spent a little bit of time this last week rather, listening to old draft episodes because I was starting a project and I was really interested in doing this project. I've been threatening it for years. And then the Aaron Rodgers news happened and that snapped me out of that idea that I was going to be productive. But I was listening to all these old episodes and I noticed something very, very peculiar. You always sound way more tired on the draft episode than you do at any other show during the rest of the year. The draft episode is always like you survived something.
I mean, well, especially last year, 15 picks, I had to do a little write-up on each one of them. I mean, like this year we changed our cover strategy at The Athletic, so it was a little bit easier on us. But yeah, that's not shocking to me that, well, especially like covering the Seahawks had like 3 picks this year. The Rams had like 3 picks. The Texans had like 2 picks, I think, maybe. Like that's the dream. Well, I wouldn't want to cover the Texans on it. That's not the dream. But that's the dream. Covering the Rams in LA, they make like 3 picks. Oh my God. But nah, this team made 11.
Yeah,
or whatever it is. It was 11, right?
Yeah, it was 11 picks. And what I enjoyed was the only year that you actually sounded refreshed was the first year that we had access to, which I think was like episode 71 or something like that. And the only reason you sounded so upbeat is because we were 2 weeks late to talk about the draft.
Why? What's wrong with us? Why didn't we wait?
I couldn't figure it out. I didn't have notes or, a memory. We've done enough of these where, admittedly, some of these blend together, but I have no idea why you had done that. I was on the show and I had no clue. I was just
wow. The early days of Norse Code, seemingly more disorganized somehow than the current days of Norse Code. Let's be optimistic and call them the middle days.
Well. Yeah,
I was probably recording. I probably didn't even have the Blue Yeti yet. I was probably recording on like a Yeti Snowball.
Whatever you were using was a better situation than I had because I had all sorts of background noise. It was terrible. But yeah, you sounded much more relaxed that one episode that was 2 weeks after the draft. I think you were still doing Vikings territory at the time.
Shock. Yeah.
So anyway, that is a potential thing that may or may not end up happening depending on how much Aaron Rodgers news continues to trickle out. I keep trying to be productive on this idea, and it's all going to crap. But with that, just want to welcome you guys to this week's show. We have plenty of stuff to go over. We have the draft to go over. We have Aaron Rodgers news to go over. We have Justin Fields stuff to go over. Plenty of material. But before we start, just want to thank you guys so much for listening to Norse Code. If you enjoy the show, there's plenty of ways that you can go about showing support. However, this week I'd like to make just a special appeal, just for this week. A listener to the show, Patreon subscriber, good friend of mine in the Grand Forks Crookston area, suddenly passed away this week on Friday, driving home from work, and he leaves behind a wife, a 3-year-old, and I believe a 26-week-old child. And there is a GoFundMe page out there that you can find in the show notes and in the description of this episode up on wherever you're listening to, Spotify, iTunes, whatever. And I have independently verified from Craig's widow that this is indeed something that is going directly to her. This is for funeral costs, and they lost their dad. This knowing Craig as well as I had, the last thing he would have wanted to do was to leave his family in a situation like that they're now in. So if you would please check that out, if you feel like donating to them, or if this was a week that you were thinking about donating to Norse Code, please just head over there and help them out. I really would appreciate it. It's a really rough situation, and most of us that knew him aren't taking it very well. So if you would please help out his widow, we would definitely appreciate that. Craig Theed was an awesome guy, an awesome Vikings fan, and despite the fact that he grew up in Wisconsin, and enjoyed all things Wisconsin beer, he hated the Packers. So if you need any form of whatever to make it over there, check out the GoFundMe page. We got the link up. Just getting that out of the way. Thank you so much for listening to my minute and a half on that. We do have a couple of people who did give out last week, so just want to cover a couple of quick things. Brian Anderson gave over on Patreon. Thank you, Brian, so much. David Wright sent out a nice message to us over on Patreon after he signed up. Said, "G'day, James. Sorry I've not done this earlier. I have loved the content for the past year, but always seem to be in my car when you mention the part about keeping the Loch Ness Monster at bay. Well, it's done now. I hope that we draft a kicker, simply so I can watch the mushroom cloud caused by a reef exploding from the safety of the UK. All the best, from David." Thank you, David, so much. Also, a message from Kyle Slaby, who has decided that he is going to take a producer role in all of this by increasing his Patreon donation to the point where now it appears that Arif and I are going to have to do a watch along, or a watch along to the prequels of Star Wars.
So how exactly is this? You just contribute enough monthly, or what's happening?
Well, he increased his PayPal or his Patreon amount by like 6 or 7 times the normal rate, and I think at this point he might be he's attempting to get like executive producer credits or something on a show. But
did we offer like this? Did we shoot ourselves in the foot, or is he just asserting that this is what we can do now?
I made a joke about it on Twitter, and then he said, "No, that sounds fair," and then he did it, and I was like, all I have learned over the past few weeks is how not to call somebody on their bluff, and I walked right into that. And yeah, so it appears that we're going to be doing this. More details forthcoming. But all of that can be found on patreon.com/NorseCode. So now that we have all of this out of the way, let's talk about the draft. But let's first talk about somebody who wasn't a Vikings draft pick. Somebody that the Vikings did try to get, but there's a discussion on Justin Fields and the Bears who ended up trading up to get him.
Yeah. So this is an interesting conversation, because if you take a look at the 2021 NFL draft and you only take a look at, the Bears and the trade, you'd have to say, well, the Vikings would have to have given up, a future first round pick, especially because, of course they don't have a second round pick. And I don't know, maybe it's really difficult to kind of figure out, because if you only take a look at pick 11, yeah, the Bears give up a future first round pick. And also the current first round pick, as well as a 5th round and a future 4th. Like, they gave up, a number of picks, but the key is the future first, right? But if you take a look at the trade right before that, the one where Dallas traded to Philadelphia, an in-division trade, by the way, Philadelphia just traded a 3rd rounder to get up there. And if Justin Fields is falling to 10, if he's falling to 11, he obviously falls to 10. If you're Dallas, I just feel like you take one of the Vikings 3rd rounders, right, which at the time they had 3, not 4, and you benefit from the fact that the Eagles don't get the guy they want, and also you get I think probably a better 3rd round selection. The Vikings could have traded with Dallas, traded a 3rd round pick, and maybe also a 5th round pick, right? Because the Eagles pick in the 3rd round was better, because the Vikings had not yet acquired, or would not be able to acquire in this hypothetical universe, the Jets' superior 3rd rounder. I don't see why you wouldn't do that, right? Like, the Spielman had to wait specifically for a guy to fall out of the top 10 to trade up, because the cost to trade up to 11 was more than the cost to trade up to 10. So I think the Vikings made a mistake there. I think they should have traded for Justin Fields. And, this is something that I've talked about before, right? We've mentioned before on the podcast, or I've mentioned before in pieces, that I think it would be the best move would be to draft Justin Fields, right? If that's possible. And I did that in one of my mocks. I didn't do a ton of mocks with that just because I didn't think it was likely. But now with the reporting that we have from Courtney Cronin that the Vikings attempted to trade up specifically to draft Justin Fields, and there were kind of some additional rumors at the time that it could have been Justin Fields, that the Vikings were interested. I know there were some other rumors that the Vikings specifically liked Justin Fields, but nothing concrete enough that you ended up with a good piece out of it, right? What's interesting is that, Courtney is obviously getting pushback because, you criticize a team, you get pushback. And somebody, I think a guy that contributes to the mailbag of the podcast was tweeting at Courtney like, hey, how do you know that this was for Fields? And, she's like, well, I'm a reporter. I reported it. This is something, I got from my sources, right? And they mentioned that Chad Graff's reporting contradicted it. And I didn't think that was the case. So I went back to the piece. So Chad Graff is my colleague at The Athletic. I went back to the piece and I was taking a look at it, and I don't think it contradicts Courtney's reporting. So here's kind of what Graff have to say. So Spielman generally doesn't even try to trade into the top 10. This year, the Vikings considered such a move. There are fewer prospects available in this draft, many of uncertain medical backgrounds. So if there was a time to move up, Spielman determined it was this year. The board seemed to be falling just right for the Vikings to move up and draft a player like Slater who was falling, right? So that's not a report that they were specifically attempting to trade up for Slater. The Vikings called multiple teams inside the top 13, which also implies, they weren't just attempting to trade up for Fields, but they could have been trading up even after the Fields pick. They were turned aside by each one of them at one point because the other team had no interest in moving back, and at another because the other team didn't think Minnesota's offer was strong enough. So they must not have had a conversation with Dallas, because if Dallas had just asked Minnesota to match the Eagles' offer +1, I don't know how you say no to that if you're trading up for a quarterback. So Spielman doesn't speak up who he wants to trade for. Chad reveals the fact that the Vikings essentially had Darrisaw, Vera Tucker, Kwity Paye, and Jalen Phillips all in the same tier, and so they were willing to trade back to get the guy that they wanted. But he never... So here's the thing. So in this piece, he says they wanted one of the two top offensive tackles, Penei Sewell and Rashawn Slater, per a source, and there's some around the league who believe the Vikings may have considered drafting a quarterback too, but Spielman declined to say on Thursday night who the team was targeting in those early attempts to move into the top 10. I think that that these reports do not contradict each other, first. Second, that I think both can be true, right? Which, the second follows from the first. So if the Vikings attempted to trade up into the top 10 specifically, my belief would be, especially because of Courtney's reporting, which I haven't, read through line by line, right? I saw the piece real quick, and then I saw some of the reactions to the piece, and then I had to jump onto a call, so I wasn't able to see it. But if you believe that reporting, you can believe that they attempted to jump up into the top 10, right? And then you can also believe that after Fields was drafted, they still attempted to jump up and draft and pick a guy like Rashawn Slater, who, if I take a look at the 2021 NFL draft, Slater went to the Chargers like everyone expected? I'm trying to remember now. Yeah, he went to the Chargers. So they tried to jump up over the Chargers or trade directly with the Chargers. They tried to jump up to the Cowboys, I imagine. And so they could have attempted to have discussions with both of those teams in an attempt to draft Slater, right? But before that, they could have had an attempt with teams prior to that in an attempt to draft Fields. And I find that really curious, right? So let's take a look at Courtney's article. Obviously, we'll link both of these pieces in the show notes. But it just says, according to multiple sources, a Vikings coach reached out to Cousins in the lead up to the draft to let him know Minnesota was considering taking a quarterback. It wasn't to warn him his job was in jeopardy. It was a simple heads up so Cousins wouldn't be blindsided. Then on Thursday, Spielman said the Vikings tried to trade up. The Vikings were also preparing. So sources told ESPN that Minnesota had an eye on Northwestern offensive tackle Rashawn Slater and tried to move up to land him before he went to the Chargers at 13. The Vikings were also preparing to take Fields given the way the board was falling. As Minnesota watched Carolina and Denver pass on Fields at numbers 8 and 9, their distant dream suddenly felt like it could become a reality with the Vikings ownership in the main draft room. Front office personnel worked the phones and tried to see where they might have moved up to land Fields. I don't know why they didn't call or they must have called the Cowboys and decided that that price was too high, which again, very weird to me. The Vikings were stunned. This one really stung. They wanted one of the top quarterbacks, but they weren't desperate enough to give up that kind of draft capital for a player who would be sitting behind Cousins for at least a year. I think that that's bad process. I think if they wanted Fields, if they determined that he was a top 10 worthy draftable quarterback, or even better, right? Because they didn't think that he would fall that far. It sounds like from the wording of the story. I don't know why you wouldn't trade multiple firsts for that guy. Like, that's wild to me that you wouldn't do that. It's a quarterback. The quarterback is the most valuable asset you can have. A quarterback on a rookie deal is the most valuable asset you can have. Like, yeah, you're not going to get that guy for one of those years of the rookie deal, right? Because you're playing Cousins, but you can trade Cousins after this year, right? Rework a contract to get him to a place where he wants to be. Cousins always wants to be in a place where he has a lot more security. That was his priority with the Vikings. He mentioned that openly and publicly in a presser. He talked about how great it was to have a guaranteed contract. The fully guaranteed portion of the contract was really important to him. He would be able to figure out a trade destination that would be amenable to him in terms of that security. And he'd probably be able to rework a deal with the Vikings that it wouldn't hurt the Vikings in terms of their cap hit, or it might, right? And the Vikings would just take that hit for that year. And he'd be comfortable with his new team. So you can do that, right? And then you get 3 years plus a fifth-year option for a guy like Justin Fields that you apparently believe is a high-level quarterback, right? That you believe is worthy of being picked in the top 10. Everyone who listened to this podcast probably listened to the one right before the draft. I think the world of Fields. I think that he is a remarkable quarterback. He was my quarterback too. I think that he's really good. So I think that would have been a great move, right? And I defend Cousins a lot on this podcast. I also criticize him a lot on this podcast, but I think that he's generally a pretty good quarterback that you can win a Super Bowl with him. But I think that a player like Fields, not only does he have the capability to elevate kind of his supporting cast and surpass it, right? Not be tied to a supporting cast in the way that Cousins is in terms of his level of performance. But I also think the cap difference that you get is helpful because you can build a better supporting cast around him than you can for Cousins, at least for 3 of those 5 years, because of, 3 of the 4 years, I should say, because the 5th year option, top 10 is a franchise tag. It's pretty expensive, but you can build for 3 of those 5 years. Plus you'll probably give him an extension instead of the 5th year option, if you're considering a 5th year option in the first place, in which case you probably also have enough draft or a lot of cap space in that 5th year as well. So in a number of those years, you've got the ability to bring in free agents and prepare yourself for a run. You can build a better supporting cast around him. Plus, you've got a guy that I think personally is not someone who's dependent on the supporting cast in the way that Cousins is. So I thought they should have been able to do that. So it's really interesting. I don't think it contradicts the reporting that Chad did. In fact, now that I've read the Cronin article, it coheres perfectly with it, right? Because it even confirms that the Vikings really wanted Slater, and that even after the Fields trade, it looks like they might have tried to trade up for Slater, which I can understand why the teams that drafted right before the Chargers, which are actually just the Cowboys, right? I can understand why the Cowboys didn't want to trade down any further, right? Because they really had their eye on Micah Parsons. They didn't pick up a 5th-year option for Leighton Vander Esch. Jalen Smith is no, lock to make a roster, right? And they ended up drafting Divine Diablo and Keanu Neal, right? And signing Keanu Neal to be a line. They've got 8 linebackers, right? They wanted linebackers, and so they got Micah Parsons. So I understand that, but I'm kind of flabbergasted a little bit. So that's that story. If you evaluate, I think the Vikings draft independent of that, right? I think a lot of people could and probably should come away with positive vibes about it, right? This feels pretty good, and I get it. I think that for the most part, it was a pretty good draft. It's just with that in mind, right? It becomes that kind of dominates your conversation about the draft. And I mean, it went to a division rival, right? And that's the big part of it. If the Vikings did attempt to trade up for Justin Fields, and Justin Fields ends up becoming a top 5 quarterback or whatever, and he's in the division, you can hear about that forever. That sucks, right?
This is gonna, we won't really find out probably. We probably won't find out within the next 2 or 3 years just how good he ends up being, and that ends up kind of coloring exactly what people think of the 2021 draft for the Vikings.
Yeah, even if Darrisaw turns out to be an all-pro.
Yeah.
Like, when the Vikings, quote-unquote, passed on Aaron Rodgers, right? Vikings fans have heard about that for years, ever since Aaron Rodgers finally got to friggin' play, right? Like, and it wouldn't have made sense for the Vikings to draft him in the same way, right? Because Dante Culpepper, unlike Brett Favre, was young and coming off of an MVP season, right? Or co-MVPs, or however you want to interpret it. He had one of the best quarterback seasons we've ever seen, it just turns out.
And he wasn't hurt yet.
Yeah, and he wasn't hurt yet.
The other thing that people forget about with that is he wasn't hurt yet. He'd be hurt immediately afterwards, but you can't predict that sort of thing.
Right, yeah. And so, the Packers also had an MVP quality quarterback, but an old MVP quality quarterback that they expected to move on from soon. The fact that they didn't move on from Favre as quickly as they did was a surprise to them, right? And so, that it made sense with what the Packers did. It wouldn't have made sense for the Vikings to do that. But this is a situation where the Vikings were confirmed to the attempt to get that quarterback, and so it's gonna tie. So if Darrisaw turns into an All-Pro, right? If Wyatt Davis turns into an All-Pro, if this class turns out to be really good, it's kind of not going to matter because the quarterback's going to dominate the conversation because it's the most important player position, right? So, I guess if the Vikings just beat the Bears a ton, it's not going to matter. Like if Justin Fields ends up becoming a really good quarterback and the Vikings don't really ever lose to him, it's going to, make it a little bit easier. But if Fields ever wins the Super Bowl and he's a good quarterback, that's going to be tough.
Yeah. Immediately it becomes the conversation for the 2021 draft for the Vikings.
Yeah.
Like, even though you were able to trade down from 14 and still get somebody that you wanted at 14, which is kind of unheard of, you're still having to deal with the Fields question. So
yeah.
Something that will be looked at for years to come. However, let's talk about Christian Darrisaw, who was picked up after the Vikings traded down from 14 to 23. Offensive tackle, Virginia Tech.
Yeah. So first, from a draft strategy standpoint, aside from the field stuff, I thought this was brilliant, right? I always wanted to trade down in the draft, and so the fact that they did that, I thought was smart. I was really surprised at the number of people who were upset at that, just because I had kind of maybe built a bubble around myself. Like, people talk about political bubbles or to listen to news that you like. It's like that, but for draft strategy, I guess, because the way that we were talking before the draft that I had understood the conversation to be among people following the Vikings was that most people were very happy with the idea of trading down at 14 to get a guy. And then also get a second round pick or enough ammunition to get a second round pick. And then that is precisely what happened. And then my mentions were full of people who were just mad at the Vikings, and I did not understand it. The Vikings ended up grabbing a third or 2/3, and then gave back a fourth, right? So they traded down in the first, picked up 2/3 and dropped a fourth, right? Yeah, they traded the first and fourth in exchange for a first and 2 third-round selections. So that's exactly what happened, including that really good 66th pick in the third round. So they did that, and the value calculation using the Rich Hill trade chart, which is not one of the charts that's developed by the analytics guys that say you should always trade down. It's the chart that's built off of a decade of trades and looks at what NFL teams have actually traded in pick-for-pick trades to determine their value. So using just historical NFL trade value, the Vikings netted in value the equivalent of an additional fourth-round pick. So the Jets overpaid by about a fourth-round pick, right? A lot of people wanted to trade down to get a second-round pick. Getting 2/3 to trade down not that far to 23, not to 28, but to 23, is better than a second-round pick. It is as if the Vikings traded down to 23 to pick a late second rounder and a mid fourth rounder. That's exactly what it was like. I tweeted out some version of what I just said, and people got really mad at that return. And I couldn't figure out what it was that got people angry. I think it's just the Vikings. I don't know. I think people thought that I said that the Vikings essentially got a fourth, which isn't what I said, but also wouldn't have made sense, right? Like the Vikings traded a first and a fourth for 2/3. The Vikings got a fourth. Like that wouldn't have made sense, right? I tried to say that the Jets overpaid by the equivalent of a fourth round pick. Anyway, people got really mad at this, and I just don't understand it. I thought it was the right move. So from the Vikings perspective, they don't see it the way that the analytics guys see it, who thought the Vikings did even better with this trade, at least specifically, than the Rich Hill trade chart did, right? Because the Rich Hill trade chart is biased towards trading up because that's what NFL teams do relative to the other charts. And so they thought that the Vikings got even more value out of this than quote unquote they should have. So the analytics guys, kind of like this even more. The Vikings weren't thinking about it like that. They were thinking there's 4 players we like. The picks between 14 and 23, which there should be 10, right? If I'm doing the math right. 3 of those guys should go, and then some other guys that we are not particularly interested in. Your Zaven Collinses, your Mac Jones, whatever. Those guys will go as well. And so one of those guys should be available. If not, we'll trade up, right? Once the third guy goes off the board, we'll trade up to get the fourth guy. And as Chad reported, those 4 guys were Christian Darrisaw, Kwity Paye, Jalen Phillips, and Elijah Vera Tucker, right? And so the Jets trade up to get Vera Tucker, and the Vikings grab the 4th player on the same tier, which I feel kind of justified knowing that Jalen Phillips was on that list, because I was like, I'm confident the Vikings like this dude. Both Phillips and Paye strike me as super Vikings-y type players. Turns out they are. So my read on we'll talk about this maybe later on too, but my read on the Vikings this year was, I think, a little bit better than it has been in the past, just like historically. Every person they picked either didn't work out, so like Wyatt Davis or Christian Darrisaw, or the workouts matched exactly what I identified the Vikings look for. Like it was perfect, except for Jalen Twyman, which so I guess it wasn't perfect. But I was thinking this up until the 6th round, and the Jalen Twyman pick, that makes a ton of sense. Like, or why you would make that exception, I totally understand it. We'll talk about it when we talk about the pick. But yeah, so I thought the Vikings did really well. Time to talk about Christian Darrisaw. I did not like him as much as a lot of Vikings fans did. I don't think it would have been a good pick at 14. So the fact that the Vikings ranked him equal to Elijah Vera Tucker, I would disagree with that, right? But I think that at pick 23, I think it's a good pick, and I gave it an A grade in my piece at The Athletic. And here's why I don't like him. I think he plays as if he doesn't care about football. And this is a thing that I usually do not care about at all, right? Like I roll my eyes at guys who talk about, finishing and want to and mean streak, right? Like I try as hard as I can to say stuff like, we don't know, like I don't like to read body language during football games, which was really hard during the Diggs Thielen stuff. I don't like talking about how much heart a player has. I feel like it's very difficult to figure that out. And I'm not saying I know how much effort or heart, Christian Darrisaw has. I've got no idea. What I'm saying is that on the field, he doesn't finish. And I kind of don't care about finishing to the extent that I align myself with the Pro Football Focus guys. And I know that there's a question in the mailbag about this, and I just want to address it here because we're talking about Christian Darrisaw. I think that finishing is good and that you should do it, and that it's a quality and a trait that offensive linemen should have, period, right? But I do think that when Mike Renner tweeted out that finishing is overrated, he wasn't saying that, finishing as an offensive lineman is undesirable or irrelevant, which, if we're not, I should probably clarify for anybody who just doesn't want to get bogged down in offensive line talk. Finishing just means kind of what it sounds like, finishing the play, finishing the person in front of you. It is expanded in its definition to mean a couple of other things, but like when you pancake a guy, that's finishing, right? Beyond it, it's not just pancaking, right? There's a really funny video tweet from Duke Manyweather, who was responding to Mike Renner when Renner said that finishing is overrated. And he was saying finishing is non-negotiable. And he talked about all kinds of things that are now kind of in the field of finishing, which include giving a shove after the whistle, letting a guy know that you're going to be there all day, that it's going to be tough for him, asserting your attitude on the field, making sure that from every perspective of evaluation that you're not a pushover, right? And, that's the kind of stuff that I think tends to it's easy to evaluate, and so it's easy to kind of overrate. He says it's not overrated because you ask anybody who's played the game, which admittedly, when I play, I don't play offensive or defensive line. I play cornerback badly. But you ask anybody who's played on the offensive line or the defensive line, it makes a difference, right? That it frustrates defensive linemen. They know you're going to be in their grill all day. It shuts them down. It has a long-term impact over the course of a game. Maybe, I don't know. So if I don't think these things matter as much as people say they do, why do I care about Christian Darrisaw finishing? Because it's that bad. It's and I'm writing a piece on this, obviously, to get more in depth on it and kind of collect my thoughts. It's so bad that there are so many players that you can identify, especially his game against Miami, but his game against Liberty of all teams, right? And Liberty actually had a really good team this year, relatively speaking. But like, you're a Power 5 team playing against Liberty, like you should just dominate. He got a really good quarterback, but they should just dominate. If you're not dominating Liberty, that's kind of weird, right? But his game against Duke, his game against Miami, especially his game against Miami, there's so many plays, and he's going up against Quincy Roche for the most part, who I thought was going to be a 4th round pick. He ended up going later to 5th, 6th round. No, he is. No, that was Rochelle. He went in the 6th round of the Steelers. Of course, he's like a perfect Steeler edge rusher. So he's going up against Quincy Roche, who before the season started, I think people had him on a watch list as a potential top 40 guy. He didn't fulfill that, but he's a really good player, right? He's going up against Quincy Roche for the most part. And he also, against Duke, went up against Victor Dimukeje, I think. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Dimukeje, another draft pick. And there's so many plays where after about the first second, he's kind of just not, he just kind of stops. Like not stops his feet, which is a coaching point. You need to keep your feet moving when you're anchoring. No, that's not it. He just stops like playing and he looks back at the quarterback and the play's not like done. Like he's just like, I don't know what's happening over there. Or he stops and he's looking at the running back who's running by him and he's like, the running play is occurring. I like to watch football. Let's see. And the guy that he's attempting to block makes the tackle. There's at least 3 or 4 instances in the Miami game alone where the person he's blocking, he beats, and that person still makes the play, whether it's a sack or a tackle for loss. That's my issue. And I am surprised that a person who plays like that ends up going in the first round, because that is something that people tend to, it's kind of the reason that Yodny Cajuste fell so far, right? And Cajuste I thought was like a pretty good player. It's kind of the reason that most teams were not as high on Andre Dillard as Philadelphia or admittedly me was. And so, I was kind of surprised. So I was asking around about, why this problem only kind of appears at the back end of scouting reports, why it just seems like a small weakness, that it's just kind of an offhand. Some scouts are concerned he doesn't finish well. Like it's mentioned kind of as a small weakness in the Brugler report. It's kind of mentioned as a small weakness. I think in the Bob McGinn piece evaluating all the tackles, which that one's always interesting because they're unvarnished, right? The scouts just kind of dish. And that one's always kind of fun. But it felt like it was kind of weird that it didn't end up becoming a point of emphasis, because there's so many years where, somebody falls and the scouts say that he's soft, right? We think that he's soft. And again, I hate calling anybody soft, especially a guy who plays football, right? It's just like not something I care about. But like, because if you play well, you play well. I don't really care. Like if you prevent pressures, you prevent pressures. Great. I don't really care if you give somebody the business afterwards. But like it just kind of like he ended up as the 3rd ranked tackle in McGinn's rankings of offensive linemen after talking to a bunch of scouts. Right. It was just kind of like, whatever.
What sort of answer changes a scout's mind after seeing him play like he has? Like what kind of like answer would satiate a scout? Like, no, I was saving my actual play for the pros. Like, is that what was said? Like, how do you convince them?
This is kind of interesting. Someone was like, well, he was playing, mostly hurt this year. Maybe he was kind of like saving himself, like in terms of preventing injury and stuff like that. And I feel like, and I really hate that I'm going to kind of say this, but I feel like if you're too hurt to play your position effectively, you should just not be playing. Because he had a knee sprain in like November. Like, okay, I guess did he have like a sports hernia? I want to look this up real quick, because it might be something that we don't know. But I remember like something about, yeah. So he had sports hernia surgery in January, so he was probably playing through that. And there's another piece here from DraftWire that he was playing through injury, right? So I feel like if you're so hurt that the way you play is like a detriment to the team, right? That you're giving up sacks just because you won't finish. You probably should just not be playing. And like, I guess it's a testament to him that he was playing through injury, but like, it was not a particularly gritty showing of playing through injury, right? So in order to kind of test that, I wanted to take a look at his 2019 stuff, and I did. His 2019 stuff is like a lot better, but not like he's a worse player in 2019. So it's like tough to keep it like he was dramatically better at a bunch of the stuff I'm going to talk about that he's good at in 2020. So yeah, I don't know. Like it's weird, very weird. And it's not that he was enough better that I feel very comfortable with it, but you do get many more examples of him, finishing a player, right? And there's a really good example. I think it was against Duke, where he and he doesn't, in the run game, he doesn't always go up against edge rushers. He's always down blocking against a defensive tackle, so it's kind of hard to tell. But there's one rep where he loses his positioning, and he has to regain it. And so he just uses the player that he's blocking as leverage to get back on his feet, and he torques the hell out of the dude. It looks great. Like he gets back on his feet, throws the dude to the ground, and he's good. He's fine, and the other dude can't do anything. And I was like, that's great. I want to see more of that. But that was just him like recovering. It wasn't him like playing very mean. It was very weird to me. But yeah, so in 2019, he plays with a lot more aggressiveness, but it's just like, how gritty are you? You're playing through injury. That's pretty tough, right? That's pretty incredible. I can't play through an injury that I would require surgery to play through. But, comparing yourself to other offensive linemen who play hurt kind of all the time, that's good. But like, you're not like really like you're playing gingerly, right? You're not really playing through injury in the same way that, a lot of these offensive linemen will when they play through injury, that they continue to play mean. My understanding is that this wasn't like a directive from coaches, like, hey, when you beat a guy, you're good, right? You can kind of let up. Like, my understanding is that it wasn't a directive from coaches. If it was, I'd be a lot more kind of forgiving. But the 2019 stuff does show a more aggressive player. I'll write about all of this and more. The stuff that I like about him is I think he moves really well. I think he's kind of underrated actually as a mover, and there's a lot of people that say he's a good mover, and I think that they get it, but I think that we can emphasize it a little bit more. He's really great at mirroring and pass protection. Like, he is really phenomenal at figuring out what the plan of attack is going to be for an edge rusher, especially in pass protection, and finding the best place for him to be to stop that guy from getting there. I think he overprotects against the inside a little bit because he can rely on his natural athleticism to get to the outside if the guy's just going to attack the outside. For the most part, it didn't hurt him. I think in the NFL it would. But I think that this is one of the reasons that he's not considered as athletic as that I think he probably would have tested as if he had been able to test. And again, it's that injury, right, that he wasn't able to work out. But he kind of overprotects the inside, and that's kind of like a refreshing change from like Matt Khalil, who would constantly give up the inside. But like, he overprotects against the inside, trusting himself to be able to get to the outside fast enough. And I don't think he'll be able to do that. I think he has to make better decisions about being able to read a defensive tackle or defensive end. He's really patient, which is kind of funny given that like he'll be so patient. He'll just like watch the play occur. I think Dane even called him a spectator. And when Luke Braun tweeted about it, I was like, well, you can't knock him too much. We all like watching football, right? Like, the fact that he's watching the play as it occurs is not great, but like, I get it. Football's pretty fun. But like, yeah, I think that I don't know. He mirrors against rushers really well. He is pretty strong and powerful. Like I mentioned, when he just torqued that dude out of his pants, like just incredible stuff. And he's got pretty good anchor when he gets bull rushed. There were some pretty long edge rushers that got into his chest, and he was able to to anchor against them and sit and prevent them from getting through to him. I mean, he's strong, he's powerful, he's quick. I think that he reads rushes pretty well. I'd like to see more reps of him trying to get to the outside on a zone run. Like his zone run grade at Pro Football Focus is like really high, but like they only really ever had him down block and never attempt to get to the outside of an edge rusher. So I would have liked to see more of that. So I don't really know how he does there, but he gets to the second level pretty well. He gets to the screen location pretty quickly and fast. I don't know. He's good at all the skills, right? Which is a difficult thing to say about a guy that you're criticizing, but he's like good at all the stuff, right? When he gets his hands first on a guy and hits him in the chest, they're like almost out of the play, like 95% of the time or something. Like they get stoned, right? Like it's just, they lose their rush plan because he knocks them out. Right. So he's powerful. He's got heavy hands. And he's got really good grip strength if he wants to use it. And that kind of sucks. What's interesting is that in the Dane Brugler scouting report, Brugler mentions that the coaches say that he's got an incredible work ethic and a lot of toughness, right? He's an absolute warrior. So obviously they're proud of him for being able to work through that injury, but like, you compare that to him not finishing a guy, it's very weird. So yeah, he is kind of everything you want in a tackle, but like this other stuff is so overwhelming in my evaluation. I have to silo it, talk about it separately, and then talk about this. There's going to be a complete film breakdown at The Athletic in a couple of days. So I'll have collected my thoughts and have a more complete, I might even contradict some of the things I say here as I watch more 2019 stuff. And have a more complete evaluation of him. But he's a bizarre player to watch and think of as a first rounder.
I guess my main question then becomes, is this the sort of thing that is teachable?
So yeah, that's a really good question because there's a really good example. It's the Bears offensive tackle, Tevin Jenkins. Jenkins coming out of the 2019 season was criticized for not finishing, which is a wild thing to think about if you've only ever watched 2020 Tevin Jenkins. He is probably the meanest offensive lineman in college football. He just beats people up, and then when the whistle's done, it doesn't make like he gets so short of committing penalties so many times. Like he'll beat the hell out of a guy. Like there are a couple of plays where he's driving people like through the sidelines and then into the literally into the benches. Like it's just wild how much he'll beat the hell out of a guy. And it turns out that was not a strength of his in 2019. And at the end of 2019 or at the beginning of 2020, he said this in interviews a couple of times, I'm going to be an asshole. Like I'm gonna beat people up. I'm gonna be aggressive. And he did. I think that's pretty rare, but it's interesting that we have an example from this year's draft class of a guy who ended up becoming the best finisher in the class, the most aggressive player at the position in the class. What did Brugler say about him? It was really funny. He had a quip about him in one of his pieces, like finishes guys into Tuesday or something like that, or blocks people the next Tuesday. Just like finishing with a kill shot and sending defenders into tomorrow. There's the quote. Yeah. That's who he is.
You can't ask for a much better write-up as an offensive lineman at that point.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I guess it's teachable. I would argue it's pretty rare though. Like it's interesting that the guy who went like 3 picks ahead of Darrisaw is an example of the guy that if you want to say it's teachable, you can point to. But also if and as I break down more 2019, I'll be kind of interested in seeing if this is if that's who he was in 2019, but it was like a sports hernia thing, which is a ton of pain, by the way. I want to emphasize that's an extraordinary amount of pain. The fact that Adrian Peterson's second half of his 2012 season was played through a sports hernia is like a medical miracle, not to mention that it was already a medical miracle going into the season, right? Like that is a ton of pain. But like, yeah, I don't know. I'll watch more 2019 stuff and see if that's kind of part of who he is. And if you can explain the 2020 stuff away that way, because it's not great, but it is a lot better. The stuff I've seen so far. I've mostly watched the North Carolina game. I'm going to watch a little bit more of some other games to see if this is like a consistent feature of his, but it's kind of wild.
Okay, so we are going to move on to the third round because the Vikings did end up picking up a quarterback, Kellen Mond, quarterback from Texas A&M.
Yeah, also interesting, right? Because, we just had this conversation about selecting a quarterback. I think it's a good pick, right? I think that anytime you've got the chance to get a cost-controlled quarterback, you should take it. If there is a possibility, like a decent possibility that quarterback turns into a starting quality quarterback. And there is, right? Because A, of who the quarterback is, and then B, you take a look at some third and fourth round quarterbacks. Obviously, we'll remember Russell Wilson and Dak Prescott. But, there's more, there's more like, quote unquote busts than there are successes. But, if you get a CJ Beathard level quarterback out of this, you'd probably be happy. I think it's a great move. He is a really difficult quarterback to evaluate. I haven't broken down his film in total yet, but like there are some games where he is really astounding and some games where he's just really bad and some games where it's like both, right? Like against Florida, he opens with essentially a pick six and then he puts together some amazing highlight throws. Not a ton of other quarterbacks in this class have those throws. And then kind of as the game goes on, he makes a couple more baffling decisions. He's got a really strong arm. But he mostly works the middle intermediate of the field. He doesn't like hit the hashes as much as you'd like, which is a really good sign of arm strength. And he has arm strength, and he doesn't seem to use it that much. And he doesn't go deep. He had a 10.6% deep ball passing rate, which was 114th of 125 quarterbacks. It's really low. Like he just really doesn't challenge deep. And I know some people have responded to my Twitter analysis of that with, that was a product of the Jimbo Fisher offense, which like I've seen a couple of Jimbo Fisher offenses. They were not lacking for like deep shots, right? But also you just like watch some of these games and they're deep shots that are open that are part of the progression that he declines, right? So he's an interesting prospect. His accuracy is not great. I don't know. There's going to be a lot of work that you have to work on with him. You need him to make decisions faster. You need him to make decisions more wisely, I guess. You kind of love the aggression with those tight windows in the middle of the field. You want it to translate elsewhere. And you need him to, he's got a quick release on short and intermediate throws, and then he changes it for deep throws. You want him to have a consistent release so that he can have consistent accuracy. And there's probably something mechanical worth fixing with him that might improve his accuracy. And then also like off platform, his accuracy suffers a lot. Like he's much better on platform, which is difficult because he's a pretty athletic quarterback that he's not quick to scramble. Like he'll go through his progressions kind of slowly, honestly, and then decide, kind of what he wants to do in terms of his feet. But he's a really athletic quarterback. It would just be nice if he could throw off platform to really fully be able to use that athleticism. We'll see. But I like the pick a lot. He's reputed to be, I was reading Rick Saratella's scouting report. Apparently this guy is just a wizard on the whiteboard, like really smart, like in terms of ranking the quarterbacks by whiteboard smarts in the draft class. It's like he's up there with like Mac Jones, I guess. So really smart. It doesn't just translate onto the field. He's not making decisions as quickly as he should when the bullets are flying. So we'll see. But it's kind of interesting because the only reason the Vikings were really that into Sean Mannion was because he was such a good whiteboard quarterback and he was really good to have on the sideline. So if Mond really is that, if he really is that good on the whiteboard, he'll be an asset regardless, right? But, hopefully he can turn into a starting quality quarterback. I liked it.
So also in round 3, because there were several picks in round 3, round 3, pick 78 was Chaz Surratt, linebacker from UNC.
Yeah, former quarterback, even played quarterback for North Carolina for a bit. Not very good, obviously. But he played a little bit of linebacker in high school. They decided to transition him there in college, and he picked up the position super quickly. He had like 100-ish tackles his first year as a linebacker. And then he came back for his redshirt senior year as a linebacker, also got another 100 tackles. Pretty good at getting near the ball. Reasonably athletic, pretty athletic. He's an older prospect. I just like, if you have an older prospect who is new to the position or the game, right? I feel like you're in a kind of a difficult spot. Like he's 24 years old and he's just now learning how to play linebacker. That's pretty tough. I don't know. You don't have a lot of time to get him up to speed in the position and have him start. What's interesting is that one of the few people that ever that was finished effectively by Darrisaw was Chaz Surratt. Like the one guy that couldn't beat Darrisaw's block after a couple of seconds. Like there's a note actually in Brugler's draft guide that Surratt was driven 30 yards downfield by Darrisaw. And it's like, all right, so the one game where you saw both of them, that's the one where you decided to get the one guy that couldn't beat Darrisaw's block. That's kind of weird. But yeah, he has trouble beating blocks. That's tough. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Eric Kendricks, just in terms of his inability to beat blocks. Kendricks, I think, has a little bit more natural strength, but his take-on skills coming out of the draft were just not that good. And he improved them really tremendously to become, an all-pro level linebacker. Surratt, I don't think has that ceiling, but, if you can teach someone to take on blocks, there's that. He doesn't have the same strength, though. So I didn't love the pick. I thought there were maybe a couple of other linebackers there, but I do appreciate that the Vikings got a good blitzing linebacker. He's good at blitzing in potential preparation for losing Anthony Barr, who his contract is up because of the way that he reworked it. You could, I think that in order to kind of maintain some semblance of the scheme, you would need somebody who's pretty good at creating pressure and demands attention and respect as a rusher. And Surratt was a pretty good blitzer. I don't think he made his name by blitzing though. So we'll see.
Next up is also in the third round, pick 86, Wyatt Davis, guard from The Ohio State University.
Yeah, this was honestly a tremendous pick. He was ranked 56th on the consensus big board. Not that like all of our analysis can be reduced to where somebody was ranked on the consensus board or whatever. In which case, I could only like the Darrisaw pick, right? But he was coming into 2020 probably the top interior offensive lineman, and some people see that, and I saw Sarah Teller ranked him as his second guard prospect behind like Trey Smith, and obviously he had Slater as a tackle, right? But if this is a guy that some people thought might be better than Vera Tucker as a guard, I mean that's kind of interesting. But yeah, his 2019 was really remarkable. His 2020 wasn't quite as good. You kind of have to figure out like, did the weird and odd circumstances of 2020 affect things, or are they going to not be a factor going forward? People were talking about as an interior offensive lineman, him being a first round pick entering the season. So there's all of that to keep in mind. So that's obviously nice to see. I am kind of curious, kind of like how well the Vikings think he moves, because that one was kind of a tough nut to crack because again, he didn't do a workout, right? But I mean, they play a very, they play a zone friendly scheme at Ohio State, and his thing is that like he, one thing to keep in mind is that he also played 2020 through injuries, right? So, which is the reason he didn't do the pro day. So again, you want to give him some affordances and say that he might be as good as he was in 2019, which not everybody can do that, right? Not everybody can get back to their previous form after an injury. A really good example of that is probably Tyler Biadasz from Wisconsin, the center who went to New Orleans. I don't remember. But he just never played as well as he did after his injury. But Wyatt Davis is a lot of very, like if you kind of described his scouting report, you might mistake him for Tevin Jenkins. I mean, he's kind of the opposite of Darrisaw in some of these ways. He loves finishing. He loves beating people up. He's got phenomenal grip strength. He moves pretty well, and I think that that's true of Jenkins as well. We'll see if he moves well enough to be, a good fit from that perspective. He is he's got really great balance. He's got really great strength. We'll see if he can kind of move with that level, because I don't think that was a consistent feature when you take a look at these scouting reports. Again, he's a guy I'll be breaking down a little bit more in depth when I've got a little bit more time to. But without workouts, we don't have a really good idea. I know somebody projected him to run a 5.22, which is kind of outside that range that you want. But there's some people that think that when you do watch plays where he's got the ability to kind of get to the outside of the defensive tackle and pivot, that he can win. But really good pass protector, even better run blocker, really nasty. I think that this is a really great pick. I think it might have been maybe the best value pick of the draft. Like, I think I initially gave it to the Darisaw pick, but I like Wyatt Davis a lot. He was somebody he was not on my radar a ton just because I usually like to look at the guys who meet the Vikings thresholds first. And since he didn't do a pro day, I didn't have an opportunity to take a look at him. But so far, based off what I've seen thus far, I think that he's a good player.
And the final pick of the third round for the Vikings, pick 90, Patrick Jones, defensive end from University of Pittsburgh.
It's kind of an interesting pick because if I knew now what I knew at the moment he was picked, it would have explained a couple more things, right? Because I liked Rashad Weaver, the other edge rusher at Pittsburgh, more. I thought he was just a much better player. And the Vikings have done this a couple of times where they pick a guy where the teammate was like the more highly rated prospect, like I think was Wyoming safeties, Andrew Wingate and Marcus Epps. I liked Wingate a lot more. Marcus Epps, it turns out, is having a better career. So I guess the Vikings got that on me. This has happened, like, I think, at receiver a couple of times too. Like all those Arkansas receivers back when they drafted Jarius Wright, which I think Wright ended up having the best career. So, maybe I just keep on, screwing up this evaluation. But so the reason knowing now matters is because Rashad Weaver, a couple of days before the draft, was implicated in a domestic violence incident where he just got arrested or charged today. I think charged, not arrested. And so presumably executives knew about that beforehand. And the official charges only just came down today. So the Titans who drafted him, I just feel like given kind of what happened to your first round pick last year, you'd be a little bit more diligent about making sure that just doesn't repeat. I guess not. But that kind of reduces the number of prospects at edge rusher in the third round that might have been preferable. I preferred Ellerson Smith, who went, I think, in the fifth round. I'll take a quick look at that. He went in the fourth round, just behind a couple of other, like just behind Cameron Sample, who Doogie says they liked a lot. Ronnie Perkins, who was ranked higher on the consensus board. He didn't really meet what I consider the athletic thresholds that I would say make for a breakout prospect at edge rusher, but he did meet the Vikings athleticism threshold. So the fact that he was like ranked 60th on the consensus board and Jones is ranked in the hundreds, would have made that, a better pick, at least by the consensus board. But I just liked Ellerson Smith more, and he went like 20 picks later. So Jones has got decent length. He's like 6'4". He's described in a bunch of these scouting reports as really lengthy, so it might just kind of stick out on film, but his like arm length is like 32 and like 7/8 inches. It's not that great in terms of like edge rusher length, but I don't know. He's just got kind of a lot to learn. He picked up football pretty late. I think was a junior in high school. He was born in Japan. He's a military family guy, right? And so, he ends up moving around. He lived in Italy for a while, went back to Japan, primarily played baseball growing up. But, he finally goes to high school. He plays football for the first time, right? And he doesn't get recruited until really late in the process. He's not exposed to the game all that much. He doesn't have a ton of production. He did lead the team in sacks in 2020, 9 sacks in 11 games. That's not bad, but he didn't have a ton of production before that. And, it's not as if his production is like eye-popping in any direction, right? 3 pass deflections this year is really good. I think people who follow Football Outsiders, the sacks here stuff, know that pass deflections actually kind of correlate well from the college level to the NFL level, and not just in predicting pass deflections from edge rushers, but predicting their overall performance level. Like if you get pass deflections in college, that's good. But, he doesn't have a ton of power. He needs to add weight. He doesn't get off the snap, with a ton of explosion all the time, or he's kind of late off the snap sometimes, even though explosion is probably his calling card as an edge rusher because he doesn't have a ton of bend. I think I might like the other guy they drafted, Janarius Robinson, maybe a little bit more. But yeah, it's pretty clear that this guy is still kind of, he's a super high motor player, which kind of hurts him sometimes because he'll overrun the play. I think Brugler described him as all gas, no brakes. So compliment in terms of speed and effort, and a concern in terms of, inconsistent hand fighting technique, overrunning plays and stuff. He, as an undersized guy, he plays with a ton of leverage and not a ton of power. And you think, okay, so he's kind of a finesse edge rusher, but he doesn't have the technique to be a finesse edge rusher, and he also played the run better than he played the pass. So that's just kind of interesting that the prototype of the kind of guy that he is not the prototype of what his play turned out to be, which to me has always been a little bit of a concern when I read that in a player profile. But we'll kind of see. He at least does prioritize defending the run, which is something the Vikings, care about. So we'll see.
So before we get into the fourth round, I just want to point out that's 1, 2, 3, 4 picks in the third round. 4 of them. And this seems like more than usual to me as far as third rounders. These are all people that you would expect to get some form of playing time or at least make the team this year.
Yeah, so I predicted actually, I don't know if it was on this podcast, but I predicted that the Vikings would have more picks in the middle rounds than before, and fewer picks in the later rounds, and I turned out to be correct on that. And the reason for that is just the way that Spielman was talking about it in the presser, plus information that we have about the depth of the draft class. So only 800 or so players signed with an agent this year, which for context, last year was 1,900 some. The year before that, it was 1,800 some. So it was a significantly smaller pool. A ton of people took advantage of the extra eligibility the NCAA gave them and decided to go back. Because some of them only had like 3 games or whatever, right? So with that in mind, you just didn't have as many UDFAs that, if you're a UDFA and you've got the opportunity to go back, most of you will take it because you don't want to be a UDFA. You want to play yourself into draftable eligibility, or draftable consideration. So it was just a smaller pool at the bottom end in terms of players. So I predicted that, we wouldn't be seeing the bevy of 6th and 7th round picks we're used to seeing, we'd be seeing more picks in the middle rounds. And that's exactly what happened. And then he explained why it happened. And it's exactly why I think on the Gabe Henderson interview that he did for Vikings Entertainment Network, he was like, we thought the depth of the draft was in the middle rounds this time. And this is unusual. You're right, because the Vikings kind of hate the third round, like historically. They've almost always traded down in the third round. Sometimes multiple times. I believe they traded down multiple times when they drafted Jerick McKinnon. They traded down 3 times before they selected Alexander Mattison. Sometimes they trade out of the third round entirely. So like they almost always trade down or out of the third round. And that was just not something that they did this year. So it was a little bit unusual, but it was a little bit predictable just because the way that Spielman was talking about the draft class, plus our knowledge of the draft class being just substantially smaller.
Well, let's go to the fourth round then. Pick 119 overall was, we've heard different variations of the pronunciation, so I'm not saying I'm going to get this wrong or slaughter it, but Kene Nwangwu.
Yeah, and that's the pronunciation I saw spelled out, so I'm going to go with that one. He's interesting. He's very much like a Mike Boone, a Jarrell Presley, super athlete. I mean, the Vikings have loved super athletes at running back. Like when I isolated which running backs kind of meet the Vikings criteria, I put an asterisk next to the ones that just won every workout, right? So that was Kene Nwangwu, that was like Jake Funk, that was Chris Evans. All 3 of those names are stellar, right? Like one of them is Captain America, one of them is named Funk, and one of them is Kene Nwangwu. Like just incredible names, right? I am surprised that they drafted him at 119. He was ranked like 250th on the consensus board. And more importantly, I thought that Jake Funk was probably a better prospect. And he ended up going a little bit later, which was kind of interesting. Like he goes to the Rams in the 7th and he tweets out like a bunch of the criticisms that he heard, including is actually a fullback and is slow, which is just like, man, he tested fast. I don't know. Like, I haven't watched him, but man, whoever called him slow, he must either be just like one of those guys that just, his testing doesn't translate on the field, or people see a white running back and they think slow fullback. It's like one of those 2 things, and it sounds like it might be the second thing. I thought that he was probably a better prospect. Again, not based off of watching either of them. I'm not enough of a draft expert to be watching like the 250th ranked guy and develop a complete opinion on him. But just based off of kind of the my read of the scouting reports and the way that the testing numbers worked out and the production metrics and stuff like that. But Nwangwu has a good argument, and the argument is basically this: that he was stuck behind some pretty stellar running backs, which is true, right? He was stuck behind David Montgomery, who's one of the fantastic running backs that Iowa State has produced, and then he was also stuck behind another pretty good running back in Brees, I think his name is. They've got his name here somewhere, yeah, being stuck behind two starting running backs, getting injured a couple of times, not getting a ton of opportunities. Brees Hall, that's it. And Spielman mentioned this, like whenever he got the ball, you saw a lot out of him. So he had 16 carries in 2019, 7.2 yards a carry, 61 carries in 2020, 5.6 yards a carry with 4 touchdowns. But he was honorable mention All Big 12 at kick returner his freshman year. Had a torn right Achilles in 2017. So his redshirt sophomore year, he was second team All Big 12 at kick returner again. And then in 2020, this year, he's honorable mention All Big 12 kick returner. It's pretty obvious he's being considered for the kick return job. Plus, the idea that he was really good when he was given an opportunity, and he also holds the school record in kickoff return average on 92 returns. So it's not like an ill-gotten average or anything like that. And he's number 3 all time in Big 12 history. I just read that just now. Number 3 all 12 in Big 12 history in kick return yards. But yeah, so he's clearly a kick return prospect. The speed on the field is fairly obvious, but what we'll have to see is 7 career receptions. So we can't say that he's like a super great pass catching option. But the few carries that you watch of him, he kind of makes weird decisions. It's not like Mike Boone, where Boone would kind of overcorrect for. So there's the stereotype among running backs that are small and fast is that they'll always go to the corner. And Boone was kind of the opposite. He wouldn't go to the corner often enough. He would just kind of follow the blocks, even if the play wasn't there. It's not like that. I think Nwangwu is just really kind of unusual in the way that he reads the blocks, and he just kind of makes some bad decisions sometimes. Obviously, it didn't hurt him because he gets these big plays, but you have to hope that he can prove that he's a good pass catcher. Being a good kick returner doesn't mean you'll be a good pass catcher. I think we've seen that, dozens of times, but he's only caught 7 passes in his college career. And so even though like he, was supposed to be a complimentary back, they didn't use him like a potential pass catcher. So we'll see. But his athleticism is intriguing. His on-field production is at least points to something interesting. I thought the Vikings overdrafted him, but I can't hide the fact that I'm pretty excited about him. So, my brain says this was a really poor pick. Putting that aside, just as somebody who likes to watch exciting football players, I'm excited about this guy.
Next up is going to be round 4, pick 125 overall. Cameron Bynum, safety out of the University of California, Berkeley.
Yeah, I kind of want to see. So he was somebody who's ranked pretty low on the consensus board, but almost everybody who evaluated him as a cornerback. If everybody learned after or beforehand, right, that he was going to be a safety, I want to know if his stock would have risen, because he did play at the Senior Bowl a little bit as a safety. So if they evaluated him as a potential safety, I don't know, maybe his rank would get a little bit higher. Spielman says that they've had some success with converted corners into safeties, and he mentioned Anthony Harris, who I believe in his final year of college was actually just a safety anyway. But at Virginia, he played corner for I think 2 years. But there's also a couple of Virginia Tech guys, like I think Dante Exum was a cornerback to safety guy that ended up playing nickel for them for a little bit. But it's something. We'll see if this works out. But the way that you read his scouting report, he does read like a safety, right? Like he's super physical. He's got a pretty good eye for the ball. He nearly averaged a pass deflection per game for a while, which is really incredible. It's a really high amount of pass deflection production. But in terms of raw traits, he doesn't have the speed to keep up with deep ball guys, which is why he wasn't really evaluated as a corner by the Vikings. But he plays really tough. I think the line I read, I don't know if this was Dane or somebody else, but like plays with the toughness of a linebacker. I'll be completely honest. I've only watched like 20 plays of this guy so far. I'll get to him, but yeah, he hits real friggin' hard. Like he doesn't mind. Like he loves playing against the run. He does run fills really well. And we'll see if that translates to safety, if he can read the run fits, because that's a different skill set than it is at corner. But he like loves football. Like you read the Brugler scouting report, and he says he's a football junkie who eats, drinks, and breathes the game. You read some of the stuff that his coaches have said. He like lives for football. You hear his interview where he's like, "Yeah, I'm going to annoy the hell out of Harrison Smith. I'm going to ask him questions all the time. He's going to hate me." Like, it's pretty genuine how much like he loves football. And I don't know, it's just like fun, right? To like cover these guys and watch these guys and like root for them. In terms of the raw skills, he doesn't have elite speed. He doesn't seem to have elite strength. He could do a little bit better in terms of like wrapping up as a tackle. But like his biggest weaknesses are weaknesses at cornerback. So he's somebody I don't really have a strong opinion of in terms of the Vikings grade on him / overdrafting him. Like I should have a strong opinion on Nwangu and think that, but I don't really know if this ranking comes kind of honestly and just in terms of where he would be ranked if he was evaluated as a safety. But, people like him as a leader. He's supposed to be really smart, and he absolutely loves football, and he's really great in run support. So he's got good play diagnosis as far as we can tell at corner. And so he should be a pretty interesting safety convert. Plus, I mean, it's like wide open for him, right? Like if Xavier Woods isn't that good, the Vikings will probably have no compunctions about, putting Bynum above him. He's on a 1-year contract. Who cares? And if not, he can prove that he can develop well enough to be able to take over after Woods' contract expires. So we'll see. Interesting pick.
If he makes it on the team, he'll be real interesting to watch like year 2, year 3, and like watching all these things just kind of pop for him. Like all of a sudden, all the training of, oh, yep, this is exactly how I'm supposed to behave. Like it seems like there's a higher upside to him.
Maybe, right? Like just in terms of like the way diagnosis works and if things click for him, which, they should based off of the things. We should also remember though, that like the last cornerback to safety convert I can remember, Jack Tocho, was also super smart and he also loves football, and he, didn't last. So I don't want to like say, just by virtue of the fact that this guy is smart and loves football, that he's going to be able to figure out the scheme or be able to overcome the athletic limitations. But it's really hard to bet against him. Like first he's a 4th round pick, but I'm confident at a position where the Vikings don't have bodies. So I'm confident he'll make the team this year. But I would be surprised if he didn't make the team next year too. Like I think he'll be interesting to watch for sure. I don't know about upside, but I think that there's a lot of movement potential for him. Yeah.
Yeah, if the right things fall into place, he could be fun to watch. Round 4, 134th overall, Janarius Robinson, defensive end, Florida State University.
He's another guy where they're like trusting their coaching. So here's the thing about so Eric Eager made this case that the Vikings are putting too much stock into Andre Patterson's ability to develop defensive linemen. Because it's overstated. And I think Eager overstates his case, but he's got an argument, right? Like Eager says like, hey, if we're pointing to people like, so after Danielle Hunter, which, that's a win, you've got, and before Danielle Hunter, you had Scott Crichton, which didn't work out. But after Danielle Hunter, you've got what? Stephen Weatherly and Afadi Adenabo and Ade Aruna and you named like a couple of other people, I think. These aren't good players. And I think that that's like completely unfair. Like, yeah, I mean, if the intention was that they would only take 6th round picks and turn them into starters, then yeah, they miscalculated. But they clearly did a great job with both Adenabo and Weatherly. And I don't really think the Vikings should have signed Weatherly this year. But the point here is that Weatherly massively outplayed his draft pick expectation, and so did Adenabo, which is an indication that the Vikings coaching of defensive linemen is at the very least above average, if this is a consistent trait, right? But I do think that we should be a little bit more open-minded about this question about whether or not the Vikings should be able to trust the development of these guys, right? So the jury's out on DJ Wonnum. I'm willing to say that. I think that, his statistics overrated his level of play, but it's not like he played poorly for a 4th-round rookie or anything like that. So jury's out on him. But like, yeah, and Shamar Stephens a win, right? He's a 7th-round pick. But like, we'll take a look at, all these defensive tackles that have come through. Like, I don't know that Hercules Matafa is a win or a loss. He's UDFA who's on the roster, so that's probably a win. But like, you take a look at the 4th round pick from Iowa. What's his name? Jaleel Johnson, right? Like, are we going to count that as a win? Right? Like, you can't really count Linval. Like, Linval just got better with the Vikings, but he was also the top 4-3 nose tackle in the market when the Vikings signed him. So I don't know if we can count that. Jalen Holmes, that's a loss. That's the other edge rusher that Eric mentioned. Armand Watts flashed a little bit, and then we didn't see much after that. He's a 6th-round pick, so maybe that's a win. But, we didn't get anything out of him. And the Vikings just don't have a good pass rush, and they couldn't get anything out of, Ngakoue, right? Who also has, confirmed, has the tools to succeed and didn't with the Vikings, right? So the Vikings might have better than average defensive line coaching. I think there's good evidence of that. They might also be over trusting it, right? Like they have a lot of 6th and 7th round picks on the roster that are not very good, but they're still better than most 6th and 7th round picks. So I don't know. It's pretty interesting. He's another guy where it's an example of the Vikings trusting their coaching because he didn't have very much production in college at all, right? 3 sacks last year in a 9-game season, 3 sacks the year before in a 13-game season, 7 tackles for loss last year, which at least Danielle Hunter had tackle for loss production, right? Robinson doesn't. Robinson is super lengthy, right? He's got the second largest wingspan in the class. He played kind of a weird position in the Florida State defense. Played under a couple of different defensive coordinators in college. But yeah, it's mostly a guy that is reasonably athletic, right? Like around 4'6", 40 at 263 pounds, so pretty athletic. 10-1 broad jump. But doesn't have kind of bend or leverage, doesn't really, he can turn pretty quickly when he's turning the corner, but he can't get underneath with really good dip. Doesn't have a lot of flexibility in his ankles or anything like that to be able to generate a little bit more of an interesting angle of attack. It's mostly the long arms, the fact that he has pretty decent get off. I don't know. I like him more than Patrick Jones because I think that there's kind of more to unlock just in terms of who he is physically because I think he's stronger. I think there's more tools. He's got immediate special teams upside in a way that I'm not confident Patrick Jones has because he's played a lot of special teams pretty effectively. And his stuff is more coaching related, right? I think, he doesn't have a plan of attack. That's, something you can coach into a guy. But he's going to be, another test case for this, this question about whether or not the Vikings can continue to effectively prioritize, their ability to coach, raw athletes that don't have the ability to immediately contribute. So we'll see. I don't know. He knows how to use his length well. I think Patrick Jones doesn't. So, the fact that Robinson does is already a good kind of check mark to his box.
Next up is going to be finally a wide receiver. 157th overall, Ihmir Smith-Marsette, wide receiver out of University of Iowa. And wide receiver was listed as one of the needs for the Vikings, especially for a third receiver. So getting one in the 5th seems a little late.
It does. I like this guy. I agree that the Vikings probably got the receiver late. I think that grabbing a quarterback, they may not have anticipated him being there, might have changed their plans a little bit. And so, these positions that they needed to grab, they ended up, having to wait a little bit on. But I think it's a good pick. I think that, so he led the team in receiving 2 years in a row. But that sounds good, but it was 700 yards in a 13-game season and then 350 yards in a 7-game season. And it's not like he was a starter really in the same way last year. He started 4 of those 7 games. But he has really remarkable speed. He ran a 4.47. I think he runs faster than that. He was not helped by the quarterbacks at Iowa, one of whom is on the Vikings roster right now. But he didn't get to deal with a lot of great accuracy. But I think that he gets up to speed really quickly. I think that, one thing that Nate Tice really likes about him is that some of the stuff that, is taught to receivers that we don't talk about we talk a lot about route running technique with receivers, the way that you deceive them, the ability to kind of layer in effective, head fakes or body fakes or, stepping in ways that trick the cornerback or sinking your hips so you get explosion out of the break, all those things that people talk about a lot. We don't tend to talk about, ways that, well, when I say it, I say create exclusive real estate for the receiver, but stacking a defensive back when you get deep, which means When you get deep and when you win the rep getting deep, you position yourself in a way where the defensive back has to get through you, right? And so if you're running a straight line, that means just essentially just getting in front of them and even slowing down a little bit so your back runs into them before speeding back up, right? Like stacking that guy in a way that prevents them from being able to get access to the ball. Shielding the ball with your body as you catch the ball, right? Like putting your shoulder up instead of down so they can't, get their arm over it, right? All of the subtle stuff. Nate Tice really likes that. He's also not a great route runner, and so it's interesting that he can be a technician in some of these aspects, and it's primarily because he just served that deep ball role for them, and not in other aspects. He doesn't dial down as fast as some of these other speed guys in this draft. So like Tutu Atwell and Anthony Schwartz and Shi Smith, they do a really great job of dialing down and decelerating really quickly. He doesn't really do that. So they need to find a route running style for him that works, which I don't think could be the same as it would be for a lot of people. But I think that he does have a lot of potential there. He had a lot of drops. I think that we have to be careful when we talk about drops for deep receivers because you just get more drops on deep balls. That's just kind of a thing. And so we have to kind of adjust our understanding of drop rate for this guy. But I think that he could be an instant starter at kick return. It's either him or Nwangu winning the kick return job. But here's the thing that kind of stands out to me. So there are a bunch of profiles among fantasy guys about how do you find, a good receiver in fantasy and dynasty in particular. There's all these like kind of ways to break down, you got to get a guy that's at least 210 pounds that, runs this fast and jumps this high and this correlates to success or something like that. Right. There's some model. And then there's also kind of a secondary, like a production model. Right. And that one is based off of like, do they have at least 30% of their market share of receiving yards, or at what age did they hit 30% of the receiving yards on their team? And yeah, he's got a little bit of that, that he was able to hit 30% market share on his receiving yards at some point, I think 2019. But more importantly is that if you don't meet these production metrics, the second level of that might be able to identify some hits. And these are guys like Tyler Lockett, who doesn't meet some of the other models for identifying a good breakout receiver. The secondary model relies on, did the team give them kind of rush attempts? Were they good at rushing? Did they have rush touchdowns? Did the team use them on special teams as a kick returner or a punt returner? Were they good at it? Did they get, explosive yardage? And, this guy was all Big Ten kick returner once. He was Big Ten Specialist of the Year. He has 2 kick return touchdowns. He's got 4 rushing touchdowns. He averaged 26.7 yards per kick return in college. So he is a really dynamic receiver, and Iowa used him that way, that he was really dynamic and could be used in a bunch of different ways. There was a game, I think, where he scored a rushing touchdown, a receiving touchdown, and a return touchdown. So like, that's who he can be, right? If that's, that's a good model in terms of, not all of these guys are going to be able to fit that first model, especially in this year's class. So finding guys that fit that second model that are truly dynamic enough that they want to even give them rushing attempts, that's good. So there are some analytic indicators that indicate this that this guy could break out more than most. And so I'm pretty comfortable with him, even though this might have been like a wash in terms of whether or not it was a huge reach at the spot they picked him.
Well, let's go to round 568th overall. It's a tight end this time from the University of Central Missouri, Zach Davidson.
Tight end / punter, right?
Yes.
Dane calls him raw as sushi. Nate Tice tweeted out a clip where he was like, this guy does not understand route details at all, but look at this. And it's a clip of him catching a pass in the flats, getting approached by, I want to say 3 defenders, juking them all out, running all the way to the end zone. Mind you, it was at the Division II level, right? So which is a little bit different than like even the FCS level. But a lot of athletic potential, kind of interesting. So he was recruited as a punter to Central Missouri and did not have a ton of position. Like when he did play on the field in high school, he's a tight end, but he's kind of scrawny then, which you'd look at him now, he's not. But his as he was getting recruited, they talked about other positions for him, not just punter. So it was a thing. But my favorite, like he did an interview with Tony Pauline and somebody else. I'll link the interview. I totally forgot who did the interview with him, but over at Pro Football Network. And in the interview, he says, "Yeah, I was talking to coach about other potential positions. We were maybe, thinking about it, but I was primarily recruited as a punter, and I didn't see the field as a redshirt or as a redshirt freshman as a tight end, right? Because I was too valuable as a punter, and he was a really good punter, but I was too valuable as a punter to get hurt being a backup tight end, right?" But when I was getting recruited, the coach saw a basketball game I was playing in, and in the first 2 minutes, I got a steal and 2 dunks. And then later that night, the coach texted me, "Yeah, we're going to think about some positions for you to play." So his athletic potential was apparently pretty obvious from the get-go, but they needed to train him at tight end for a while before they could be comfortable putting him on the field. And it was until his redshirt sophomore year that he saw backup roles as a tight end. And it's interesting. He was backing up a guy that ended up getting a bunch of camp invites as a tight end. So, which at the Division II level means you're like one of the top dogs of the position in the country in Division II. So that's who he was playing behind at tight end. But he ends up kind of breaking out and having a pretty big year in 2019. And he was going to use that for a jumping off point to build draft potential or draft type for 2020, but then the season was canceled. So the fact that he got drafted is really interesting, but he had a really great pro day. So he was one of the few that, met the Viking standards at tight ends based off the historic workout data that I have. 37.5 inches in the vertical, which is nuts. Like I think the Vikings threshold is like 55% or 60% percentile, which is 33.5 inch vertical, which is, that's pretty good for a tight end if you hit 33.5, and he hit 37.5. So that's pretty remarkable.
All right. Finally, we have Jalen Twyman, defensive tackle, University of Pitt, pick 199, the fabled 199.
Yeah, the Joe Webb pick, and that's what people know it as.
That is the only reason why anyone knows that pick number at all.
Yeah, the Joe Webb pick. No, it's Jalen Twyman. The Vikings have had a 199 they had like another 199 not too long ago, maybe even last year. Do you think they believe the thing? They just keep on trying to find ways to get pick 199?
Yeah, they just want to keep replicating the success that Joe Webb had.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's the historical experience driving that. I can't imagine anything else. So this one is fascinating to me, and I didn't actually expect him to fall to the 6th round. He was identified as a Vikings target early in the offseason, 2015, or not 2015, sorry, February. Why did I confuse February with the year 2015? Long day. And I was not feeling it, right? So he didn't play in 2020. And instead decided to focus on making sure that he was draftable. He did like the opposite of that. So his 2019, he was second team All-American, first team All-ACC. He led the team in tackles for loss. He led the team in sacks. He's a double-digit sack artist, 10.5 sacks as a defensive tackle, right? This guy idolizes Aaron Donald. In fact, it's the reason he went to Pitt. It's because he loves Aaron Donald. He wore 97 because of Aaron Donald. He wants to be Aaron Donald. He also has like a really like kind of heartbreaking story, right? So I don't want to knock him too much, but he was getting recruited by like Penn State and South Carolina, and he commits to Pitt because he loves Aaron Donald so much. So he was not drawing comparisons to Aaron Donald, but he was kind of like on a path to kind of almost living up to Pitt legend Aaron Donald with his 2019. So 2020 could have set the stage for something huge for him. But God, he just had an awful pro day. And it's because he built up his body so much. So he played at 285, which is the exact weight I think Aaron Donald tested at the combine, 285. So he played at 285. He was listed at 290, but he played at 285. And he was really like, I don't know, he was like slithery. He was everything that, you describe a pass rushing 3 technique to be. He was really hard to get his hands on. He was really easy to get in backfield. I thought the sack numbers actually did really well replicate his pressure numbers. When I took a look at them, he was remarkably productive, and he was just a demon to try and block. So really good stuff. And then he gains 16 pounds for his pro day, rips out 40 bench press reps, which is incredibly impressive, right? 40 bench press reps, great. But every other workout was bad. He ran an 8-second 3-cone He jumped. The jump wasn't awful. It was bad. It was like 32 and a half. But, the 10-yard split of 1.74 seconds, 40-yard of 5.39, just a really bad pro day. Really bad. He did injure his hamstring, but I don't think it might have affected his cone time. So maybe you can throw that out. And it's the reason he didn't run the short shuttle. But he did not test, he tested more like a nose tackle. And nose tackle is the only position where I found that there is a correlation between the more bench press reps you do, the better you kind of perform in the NFL. And it's a weak correlation like all of these workouts are, but it's the only one where you could find one where there was any significance. And it was significant at the 0.01 level or something like that. But it was a pretty weak relationship. But it's the only one where that matters. And so it's kind of interesting that he tested essentially like a nose tackle at 301. And then at the medical recheck, he weighs 319 pounds. So he's well above the weight that he played at, right? He's, what was it, 20 plus 15? It's 34, right? 34 pounds over his playing weight. That's not great. And Spielman mentioned on VN in that interview I mentioned with Gabe Henderson that he's actually got the coaches. He has to text the photos of him on the scale. The coaches are he's texting Andre Patterson pictures of him on the scale to get his weight back down. And sometimes when you get up in weight and lose some of your athleticism and then go back down, you don't regain that athleticism back, which is probably why he fell, because you can't necessarily unlock that. He doesn't have an enormous amount of length. His frame was maxed out at his pro day, and then he added weight, and so it's just bad weight. In the run game he did lack power, so I can see why teams may have told him this, but it was really tough. So I just did not like his fit with the Vikings. And then he fell all the way to the 6th round, and I can't help but like the chance that they took on this. I think it's a really smart chance. His uncle played in the NFL, so he should have some point of contact to be able to kind of understand what's going to be expected of him. But if he so he's really it kind of reminds me of Laquan Treadwell a little bit, and I don't mean this to say he's going to be a bust, because I think that if you had drafted Laquan Treadwell in the 6th round, I don't think you would have been super upset with the production you got out of him, because he ends up seeing the field a little bit, right? But he works incredibly hard, right? That's not the issue. The issue is the way he directs his work, which was the same problem for Treadwell. Treadwell will do a ton of work. He'd be on the stairs all the time, right? But his work was always directed at something that was not incredibly useful. And I saw someone called Laquan Treadwell lazy to me once, very recently, and I just you don't know these guys, first of all, but second, there is no indication in the world that Treadwell was lazy at all. He worked so hard. He cared so you would catch him at times talking about how much he wanted to be this incredible historical legendary Viking. It was really important to him, and he worked really hard. That's not the issue, right? And I think it's kind of similar with Twyman. He works really hard, and his coaches have praised him for how he works, but it doesn't go in the right direction. So if he can channel that into much more productive, a workout regimen, continue adding moves. And he was actually a fairly technically skilled pass rusher in 2019. For somebody who's ineligible for the draft, he was a really remarkably technically skilled pass rusher. Really great balance when he was at that weight. Really great movement ability. He could have been a 1st-round pick if he had just continued with that level of production and he had been able to bring it all together. So I like this pick here. I just really hated where he was initially slotted to the Vikings. And this is the one area where the Vikings win outside of their workout metrics. And it totally makes sense because he 100% would have had he been at his previous playing weight.
So I did do a little bit of looking up while you were talking as to pick 199 in draft history. The Vikings actually haven't had anyone since 2010.
Oh, okay.
B pick.
I wonder what I was thinking of.
B pick 199. The only person of real note, Corey Core played for the Bengals for 7 starts in 3 seasons. The only one who really mattered so far is Theo Riddick, running back for the Lions. Who had
I think I figured it out. It was in 2017. They had the 199th pick and they traded it to Washington.
Yeah.
Who then drafted Chase Roullier, who actually I think he's another person to note. He just signed a $40 million contract.
Okay, yeah, that would be the other because right after that it's like Luke Falk. Nope. The Colts. And
I mean, he did see the field. That's a little bit better than some other 6th round picks, right?
Yeah, there definitely is that. And then the Rams did it last year. So yeah, there's the Joe Webb pick is such an odd concept sometimes. So it's important for
if the Vikings had drafted Chase Roullier with that pick instead of trading out, I think we wouldn't have had to worry about drafting Garrett Bradbury.
It's entirely possible. Well, we're going to go over to the mailbag right now. And the first thing that we are going to be mentioning is the Aaron Rodgers stuff. So we got some questions on the joy that all Green Bay Packers fans are currently experiencing with all of this breaking news leaking from clearly both sides at this point.
Oh, absolutely.
Like there's no way that this is coming from one side. This is coming from both ends here. Kirk asks, for Arif's Aaron Rodgers corner, will Rodgers need to use another team as a stepping stone to get to the Vikings, a la Favre to the Jets, or can he simply retire as a Packer and unretire to join the Vikings?
I think the rules are that you have to go to another team first, which I think it's pretty clear at this point it's going to be the Broncos, I guess. I mean, it better be. Otherwise, the way they treated the draft is going to be pretty strange.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think he goes to the Broncos. It might have to be for more than a year, unfortunately. Like I think, and that's kind of where you get to. I think the ideal scenario is he goes to the Broncos for 2 years, and then his contract is up, whatever his reworked contract is. He hits free agency, becomes a Viking, because he just wants to stick to the Packers. It's not even that the Vikings have a great team at that point. They might not. But he just wants to stick to the Packers that much. So he goes to the Vikings. And that's when Cousins' contract runs out, and the Vikings just choose to sign Aaron Rodgers instead. Reasonable. Aaron Rodgers will be 40 at that point, so it's perfect. It's like pitch perfect, right? Kellen Mond will be still on the roster and frustrated about all of this. Fine. And then Rodgers leads the Vikings to the NFC Championship game, and hopefully more, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, I think that he goes to the Broncos for 2 years. I don't think he contractually has to be a Jet for this to work out. But I do think that he does have to go to another team first.
Yeah, I think that there's no way. Like, and I enjoyed
Aaron Rodgers for Kirk Cousins, who says no.
Green Bay should, but Green Bay apparently is all about just.
Did they turn down the 3rd overall pick?
Yeah. When they tell you that it's a waste of your time to try to trade for him, and Rodgers is saying aloud, I'm not coming back. You people can, and people are like asking what his career is he's gonna go be the host of Jeopardy for a year. No, he's gonna sit home and not talk to his family. He's gonna do something, but there's things he can do over the next year. Like he's probably not going to decide week 15, okay, fine.
Yeah. He's got way more holdout leverage than like Le'Veon Bell, right? Like
way more.
Yeah.
This is a player who has covered up for the mistakes of an organization for nearly 2 decades. It is, 2 decades of quarterback play. Like he was drafted a while ago, but like this is a player who, at least for the last 10 years rather, has been covering up for just messes. Just absolute messes that the GM has made, that the coach has made, that assistant coach, like all down the organization. This guy has made your team so much better than it actually is, and everyone in the NFC North has known that since he got good, and has been waiting for the day that he gets traded out of the division, or has a Favre situation, and the Favre situation finally happened. All the Vikings really need to do at that point if the Vikings end up signing him, is just not cut his friends, apparently.
Yeah. Hopefully he makes some friends on the team first. But yeah. This is kind of funny, like, right? Because like Rodgers has been kind of pushing for input in a more realistic sense since like 2018, right? And I assume, and maybe this is not a fair assumption at all, but I would imagine that the Packers agreed to that, which is why Rodgers signed that extension in 2018. And then Rodgers felt like he was frozen out of the process after that, which is why over time he has let more and more of his frustration show through. Evidently, also, at one point, Rodgers was told, "We'll trade you after the 2020 season." I guess this is some reporting I've seen, and then he had an MVP level year, and the Packers were like, "Trade? I don't know what you heard. We didn't say trade. We said
it was trade day. It was good job.
Yeah, right.
In some other language that you're not going to know about. Yeah, it's try day. You do a good job.
Yeah, well, we said we would grade you after the season. You get an A+.
Oh.
It's a good job. I don't know what you're talking about, Trey. We never said we would do that.
You did all
this
of
guy,
this.
Jordan Love. We draft quarterbacks all the time. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, you did all of this without any targets from us. Like, you were basically playing last year on a curve.
Right. So, I mean, your GPA, it would normally be a 4.0, but when we apply the curve for not giving you a receiver, that's like a 4.3. That'll get you into college.
Yeah, it'd be like, can you imagine what how well you would have done if we would have just made this easy and picked up Justin Jefferson? Like,
so there's that. That all leaks. He's frustrated, of course, and then very clearly it's the Packers who leaked that he got upset over Jake Kumerow, which is like, God, that's the funniest thing. But he was upset at the time. Like, he made it known that he was upset at the time in public, right? Like, he was like, yeah, I don't really want to comment publicly on receivers anymore. The last time I stopped for a guy, he went to Buffalo, which is obviously a reference to Jake Kumerow. And he said that at the time, right? Like, he mentioned that Kumerow was one of the 4 locks to make the roster, and then the next day they cut him, which, honestly, as funny as it is to stick up for a guy who couldn't make a practice squad on another team, like, that is kind of like dickish. Like, to cut, like, the day after Rodgers is like, oh, this guy is a lock to make the roster. And you're like, well, he may have said that, but he doesn't sign the checks. You're out the door, buddy. So, like, I get, like, why that would particularly stick, like, the day after. Like, man, you could have waited until training camp or something. Like, nope. Just wild.
Because if Gutekunst knows anything, it's that he has instincts. And these instincts, well, most people would find them wrong, but he believes they are right. And this has led him to the situation that he is currently in. LaFleur is in such a rough shit, is in such a terrible position right now. Like,
yeah, LaFleur is like evidently, I don't know this. Apparently LaFleur was like didn't even know about the Jordan Love pick. Like, he's a huge Rodgers guy, which, like, if you're the coach, how could you not be? But, like, yeah, LaFleur is just stuck here, right? Like, he's receiving, like, all kinds of collateral damage. But it's not really, like, on him. Like, Rodgers wants Gutekunst fired. Nothing to do with LaFleur, right? Like, the whole thing about will Rodgers be able to audible in this offense / does he get input on the offense? Like, I'm sure that's frustrating or whatever, but it's very much like laser eyes focused on this front office. Very funny. It's so obvious that the Packers leaked the Kumerow thing because it looks ridiculous. But it is fun. Like, I can't get over how funny it is. Like, that's the last straw. You cut Jake Kumerow?
What was the Vikings equivalent that you had thrown out there on Twitter?
Alexander Hollins. Can you imagine Kirk Cousins throwing a fit over Alexander Hollins? And I like Hollins. I didn't want to. When I was writing that tweet, I was like, you know what? I like Hollins. I don't want to throw this stray out here. But here's the thing: the only other guy I thought of was Chad Beebe, and like, Chad Beebe is too important for this comparison. That's how dumb it is. Like, that's how ridiculous, like, standing up for Kumerow and just that's the last straw being is. Like, BB's just too important to the team to be compared to Kumerow. I'm sorry.
Just all sorts of ridiculous. Well, let's get into the real mailbag, I suppose. And James Kuno asks, for a Reef's Kellen Mond corner, what issues are in his game that prevent him from being an immediate from being an immediate starter, and are they coachable?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned a couple of them in the scouting report, but just like the fact that he doesn't have the ability to really throw off platform, that he doesn't really sense pressure as well as he should be, that he doesn't just move quickly enough. Like he doesn't make his decisions quickly enough on the field, so his processing time is a little bit slower than it needs to be. I think a lot of people will say that this is him staring down a receiver. I don't actually think that's the case. I just think that once he makes a decision, it takes him a while to execute it. So that's a huge issue in the timing oriented NFL. So yeah, are they coachable? Yeah, I think so. Not every most quarterbacks without processing speed don't get it, but there's some quarterbacks that have really improved their ability to get the ball out on time. The most dramatic example might be Jimmy Garoppolo, which I know isn't like making anyone's heart flutter or anything like that. But, I don't think that he necessarily had really slow processing speed at Eastern Illinois, but I wouldn't have considered that in my eyes to be a strength. And he gets rid of the ball real quick, both in terms of his release and in terms of the decision making that he makes. In San Francisco, I think that he's improved that really dramatically. Maybe other examples of guys that have improved their processing speed. Teddy Bridgewater a little bit. He still holds on to the ball a little bit too long, so you can't say that that's a really great example. But compare him as a rookie versus comparing him to where he is like right now or where he was with the Saints. That's a pretty big difference. He still holds on the ball too long, but it's coachable. There's not a remarkable track record I can think of off the top of my head though.
Kenneth Allen asks, who had the best draft weekend and why was it the consensus board?
Well, the consensus board friggin' nailed it. Wow. 13 of the top 13 picks were all the top 13 of the consensus board. That's never happened in the history of the board going back to 2014. All 13 picks were in the top 13. Incredible. No pick was outside of the top 500, period. That has never happened. No pick was outside, or only 2 picks were outside of the top 400. That has never happened, period. So, and I think it was also a record low in the number of picks outside the top 300. 92% of the picks were inside the top 300. That's never happened before. The pick to value, there's always steals, right? There's always people fall, like Trey Smith falls, Wyatt Davis fell. There's always that, right? But this year, I think it was less dramatic, and those guys actually got drafted. When these guys fall, they usually just don't get drafted at all. Trey Smith would have probably got undrafted in a different draft or his equivalent. And I think that is less about everybody being right. I want to say, wow, the consensus board, really great stuff. It's the perfect tool. I don't think that's it. I mean, I think it's a great tool. I don't want to undermine my own work, but I don't think it's because the consensus board was better this year. I think it has everything to do with the fact that the draft class was smaller. And I think Trey Smith would have gone undrafted if the Chiefs weren't thinking wow, we could either spend a draft pick on this guy that is a top 4 guard that might never play, or this guy that we think might never play. That was your option, right? That was so if your priority free agent class is people that normally wouldn't even get a rookie invite, then you're just drafting this guy. Normally you would compete for him in undrafted free agency. And instead, you're just drafting him. So I think that's the reason, right? That the 500 ranked player this year was significantly worse than the 500 ranked player of other years. So it was much easier for analysts to converge in that 200 to 300 range. But that doesn't explain how good they were at the first round either. 13 picks in the top 13, incredible. That doesn't explain that. So we still did a really great job, even after you account for that. I don't know. Banner year for the consensus board. Incredible work. Strangely, also the worst performing year in terms of my metrics over at The Athletic for the consensus board. I'm having a great year in terms of my metrics at The Athletic, but the consensus board got beat up a little bit relative to other years.
Also from Kenneth Allen, is Kellen Mond really intended to be a replacement for Cousins or just a project backup? I'm not sure how much stock to put into the idea that the Vikings are looking to move on from Cousins so soon after extending him.
So I assume this was asked before the news broke about the Field stuff?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that probably answers some of the question. But yeah, I think it's both. I think they're either developing him to be a backup that's going to be pretty cheap. You don't have to pay him like $3 million or whatever they paid Sean Mannion. And maybe that's his career. Great. Very cheap, I think, for a premium backup position. But he might develop into a starter. And if he's got an arm like he seems to, and he just improves that processing speed and improves his accuracy, he can be a pretty exciting starter to watch, potentially.
Next question is an interesting what if. If the Vikings, from Christopher Wiley, if the Vikings don't trade for Ngakoue in 2020, is Justin Fields a Viking right now?
I probably, but like at the same time, I like this question a lot because if they're negotiating against Chicago and Chicago is offering a future first and the Vikings offering a current second, teams will value that the same, but they shouldn't. They should just take the future first. So I would say probably, but like, I don't know. Like they could have just traded up to 10, man. Like the division rival just gave up like a third. Like that's not, or 2/3, I guess. But that's nuts. You could have done that. I don't know. Like, I think you're right, just because they've got more room to play around, and so they might be more willing to give stuff up. But like, weird. Super. And plus, they got a third back so it's not like they lost an enormous amount of trade value to work with. But I think, yeah, if they didn't trade for Ngakoue in 2020, Justin Fields would probably be a Viking. But also, if the Vikings don't trade for Sam Bradford, Patrick Mahomes might be a Viking. Like, yeah, like because they would be a much worse team, right? And so they probably wouldn't have picked 14th. They probably would have picked in the top 10. So if the Vikings evaluated that quarterback class like the rest of the NFL did, they'd probably pick Patrick Mahomes, right? Because the Bears picked Mitchell Trubisky too, or I guess they beat the Vikings once, so maybe they don't. But yeah, Patrick Mahomes is probably a Viking if they didn't trade for Sam Bradford. So you got to think about that a little bit. I mean, the other option is that Deshaun Watson's a Viking, which, wow, that sounds like a missed opportunity until this year.
Yeah, a couple months ago, that would have been a really interesting idea, yeah.
Yeah, it would have been a bit of a like, wow, I can't believe we missed out on that guy. And now we're just like, phew, bullet dodged.
I guess. Let's go to Bombo, who asks, besides the draft class, does the post-June 1st cap space go to a veteran edge, wide receiver, whatever, or a Hunter/O'Neal extension?
So this is a reference to the fact that Kyle Rudolph, the cap space for him, because he's a post-June 1st designation, will clear up after June 1st. And so there's going to be additional cap space. And that's why probably you won't hear about a bunch of the Vikings draft pick signing. I think the undrafted free agency class signed, and I think one Kellen Mond signed. But I think a lot of them are not going to sign until after that because they just don't have the space. That space will appear after June 1st. So, and it doesn't like, we don't have like rookie holdouts anymore unless you're like the Bears and you don't want to guarantee your top 10 pick, like their full contract for offsets, in which case Roquan Smith is going to hold out. But yeah, I think it's probably, so obviously the draft class, and then we might see a veteran wide receiver. I think, that would not shock me. I don't think we'll see a veteran edge. I don't think we'll see a veteran offensive lineman. I think it's probably going to be a wide receiver just to bolster that the competition for number 3. I don't think you need the cap space for those extensions though, like because those extensions will likely clear up cap space more than they will cost it. So I think if they do go after a veteran, and there's a lot of veterans in free agency right now, it would be for a wide receiver.
Well, let's talk Justin Fields for a moment. Big Tony asks, will the hesitancy to trade up for Fields be the final nail in the coffin for the Zimmer-Spielman era?
I mean, like maybe. I think it's what they might end up being remembered for, potentially. But I don't think that's going to be what gets them fired. Like if they get fired, if they trade up for Fields, they might still get fired. Like John Fox got fired after they traded up for Mitchell Trubisky. That didn't matter. Like he didn't get like 4 years or whatever. They just moved on. So like, was it John Fox? It was one of the Bears coaches at the time. But sometimes the coach of the rookie quarterback gets fired. Whoever the hell it was in Arizona, Ken Whisenhunt, got fired after a year with Josh Rosen, right? So I don't know that they would necessarily be held to the team, but I think they'll be remembered for it if Fields ends up being good, which obviously I think he will be, but a lot of quarterbacks I think will end up being good, don't end up being good. I like Josh Rosen, for example, to use that example. I thought he was a really good player. He's my top quarterback in that class.
Alex asks a very important question. How does the Bears trading up for Fields affect your evaluation of Fields as a player? Arif, how do you capture the negative impact of the Bears trading up for a quarterback from an analytical standpoint? Now, he has a point, because if you look at even if you look at the Bears' current QB room right now, which is Foles, Dalton, QB number 1, and Fields, this is admittedly a weird room, to be sure. But who is the best quarterback the Bears have ever had? Statistically, it's Jay Cutler, and it's not really all that close. Like, you really have to go backwards. And so when you look at that, you go, okay, well, the Bears historically have been absolutely awful at evaluating quarterback talent and bringing in quarterbacks. I now have to think that if the Bears are interested in somebody that everyone else seems to be interested in, there might be something wrong with us too.
Well, I mean, think about it this way, though. Like, who is the best Saints quarterback of all time before Drew Brees? Like, Aaron Brooks? I mean, it's probably Archie Manning, but he's kind of overrated. But, like, Aaron Brooks? I don't know. Like, you can't. The best Seahawks quarterback of all time before Russell Wilson was, like, Dave Krieg? Matt Hasselbeck?
I think it's probably Hasselbeck, actually.
It might be Hasselbeck. So, like, I don't know. Like, sometimes franchises that are just, like, awful at drafting quarterbacks, they figure it out accidentally.
Maybe.
I think the Bears figured this out accidentally.
It's entirely possible. They didn't have, maybe they had like the Johnny Manziel moment where a hobo told the owner what needed to happen in the draft, and he just did it.
That could be it. But it works this time.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. The Bears are a bit like, as far as like QB talent anyway, are a bit like that friend where you should just do the opposite of everything they say and things are going to work out fine. Like, I don't know. I'm not, immediately when the Bears did it, my thought was, I don't know if Justin Fields is going to be good anymore. He might just have bear stink on him forever. Nick Howard asks, would you guys have taken Mac Jones at 14?
I don't know about James, but I would have. Yeah. Get a quarterback. I on the podcast with Justice, I explained that I did in fact like Mac Jones, and Justice was not having it.
Justice wasn't having it. And I wonder if Justice's opinion changed when he saw Mac Jones's walk.
Yeah, I don't know. Get a quarterback. I always get quarterbacks. I would have taken Mac Jones at 14. If you take Justin Fields at 10, I think you take Mac Jones at 14.
Also from Nick Howard, reports are coming to light that Zimmer may have been standing on the table for some massive offensive lineman that can't pass block as well as run block. Why this shift now and not, say, when we signed Cousins?
So Zimmer, Zimmer said that in the meetings that they had before the draft, that they wanted to get back to getting offensive linemen with size. The reason that there's this shift now instead of before is because it is so hard to find large offensive linemen that can, because they did not decide to reduce how important it was to be able to move well. And so their previous standards for offensive linemen are all still there. They all still need to move well. They all still need to get up to the second level. They all still need to get to the outside on a wide zone. They all still need to get to the outside of a scoop block and flip their hips and, hinge and pivot and all that, or hinge and pivot and all that. So that's still all part of it. They just have now added size on top of it. And it is insanely difficult to find those guys. So that's why the change, because it's tough to find those guys. Now last year's a little bit different. You know, that year had a ton of bigger tackles that could move. This year's a little bit different. There's a bunch of bigger tackles that can move. I mean, nobody with arm length. I mean, this was not a great tackle class for arm length, except for, I guess, Darisaw. But it's not really like a change that you can make, because you have to spend is the thing. So if you make your requirements even more stringent, now you have to spend way more. And with a draft philosophy that asks that you get 10 people in every draft class, that's really hard. So they wanted guys that projected well in the running game, projected well in the passing game, that could move well. And that was the set of requirements. And now they need to add on top of that a guy with size. So, I mean, that's pretty tough. So, yeah, I get it. I understand like why the difference now. Plus, if you take a look at some of the teams that were winning at the time that this philosophy was crafted, not all those teams had a ton of size necessarily in their offensive lines. So it's not as if, you know, this was like something that if you take a look around the league, like, oh my God, it was all these like offensive lines with, you know, giants that were winning. It was, you know, some lines that had some big people and some were smaller people, like, you know, the Eagles, for example. You know, Jason Peters was pretty big. And when Brandon Brooks was on the team, he was like huge, but like, you know, replacing him, they didn't get a huge guy. Evan Mathis was kind of big, and he moved well. But, you know, the Travis Kelce was not a huge center. I don't think Lane Johnson was tall, but I don't think he was like a 320 pounder, was he? He was 310. So he wasn't like a one of the prototypical like 320 pound tackles that you see like Tristan Wirfs. And that was like the top offensive line. You know, like, and some of them were pretty big, right? But like, it wasn't like this thing where all you were getting were the good offensive lines were all big. That wasn't the case. So I get it. I understand like why it's frustrating to hear now after seeing all these problems with offensive linemen that couldn't hold up against the bull rush. But like that, like, given the information they had available to them at the time, you know, I don't think it was unjustifiable for them to, you know, diminish the importance of that when looking for other traits.
Professor Poop asks, as always, being the world's premier fecal microbiologist and thus an expert in crap, I am more interested in the lower end of the draft. Are there any picks I should be particularly focused on, or are all of our late round picks, quote, polishable turds, as it were?
So if he's asking if he should focus on them because they're crap or focus on them because they're polishable, I don't really know based off of the wording of the question. But I guess draft class, here are my thoughts on the players that I think are more likely to, you know, potentially work out in the late rounds. Amir Smith-Marset and Jalen Twyman, I guess. Those are the polishable ones. I don't know that the round 4 guys count as late round guys, so I'm not counting them. So really, this is just Zach Davidson shade. I'm sorry.
Jeez. Next question is from Arif's Neglected Resistance Bands. Hey guys, great content as always. Just wondering if there's a glitch or something in my podcast feed, because after James reads my tweets, he immediately moves on to the next question without giving Arif any time to respond. Anyone else having this issue? Nolan Kaler asks, for Arif's baseball corner, who is the Williams Astudillo? Sure. Of this year's draft? Odd to watch play, but gets production in weird ways that are fun to watch.
What the hell is baseball, man? I have no idea what that is.
Luckily, you don't need to know what baseball is to answer this question. They're just looking for the weird guy who gets production in weird ways.
I think both Rondale Moore and Kadarius Toney are pretty good examples of that from like the class overall. I don't think there's really any Vikings that fit that mold. Like, I guess Christian Darrisaw just like deciding to give up on plays, but still having like, oh, here's also the thing. So, like, he's a guy that really tests the trust the film versus the trust the spreadsheet thing. His analytics are friggin' great. Like, he's got great pass protection numbers. His Pro Football Focus grade is through the roof. And he just like kind of gives up on plays sometimes. And so maybe you should just trust that he doesn't give up that much pressure, even if it looks like he is. So I guess from this year's draft class, he'd be that guy. But I think overall, probably Kadarius Toney and Rondale Moore are the ones where you're just like, I'm not really sure how this is working, but it's working. It's pretty fun. Those are those guys. And then the weirdest draft pick had to be Tutu Atwell, 249 pounds at his medical recheck. Come on. Or 149 pounds. Sorry. 149 pounds at his medical recheck.
World of difference there, yeah.
Yeah, huge difference. James, how close is one of your kids to outweighing Tutu Atwell?
Boy. See, here's the problem. The oldest is skinny as a rail, and my son is he's up there but he has a lot of, like, he's like 5, he's about 5 feet something right now. He's about 5 feet and like 8. So he's coming by his weight earnestly at this point. So he's getting there. I think he's more than halfway there. All
right. Okay, cool. So let us know when your son hits the Tutu Atwell Mendoza line. And then they can have a pushing contest. We'll see who wins.
I've been taken down by the 8-year-old. It's entire. He's
been training for this day.
He wraps up too. Like, it's you have to teach him to wrap up. Otherwise, you sit and watch him on CBS on Sunday and go, how is he not wrapping up? He's supposed to be wrapping up there. So,
oh man, by the time that kid's 11, it's curtains for Atwell.
Maybe curtains for him now. Let's go to Kyle Slaby, who asks, the 2 new offensive linemen seem to be more powerful players in Cleveland and O'Neal. Assuming having them change sides doesn't functionally change their ability to contribute, would you rather have both of them stylistically similar guards and tackles on the same sides, or would you space them out? So, is it better to have Darrisaw, Davis, Bradbury, Cleveland, O'Neal, or Darrisaw, Cleveland, Bradbury, Davis, O'Neal?
So I kind of like the nature of this question, but I think, so first and foremost, I would like to have Cleveland on the left side and Davis on the right side, because Davis played his entire career on the right side and Cleveland played almost his entire career on the left side. So that footwork and hand technique and stuff, that is familiar to them and it's already in their muscle memory. So I would like that. But the question assumes that this does not change their ability to contribute. So with that in mind, I guess I would prefer to have the stylistically similar ones on the same side, because back like a decade ago, so not even the old days, but like a decade ago, the NFL actually would do that, where they would put, and a lot of high schools still do this, and colleges even do this, the D1 colleges still do this, where sometimes, where your bigger, slower guys are on the right and your quicker guys are on the left. Now, some of this was just a product of the guys on the left are pass protectors, the guys on the right are run blockers, and then you would run to the right more often. And in high school, you still see that, where they'll just run to one side way more often than the other, because that's where their powerful blockers are. I think that if you did that in the NFL, yeah, you get found out. But I think if you had the stylistically similar guys on one side and you ran, one set of plays a little bit more often to one side and another set of plays a little bit more often to the other side, I think you're in a better spot. And there's a reason that was something that you did for a long time now, because of the way that talent is distributed a lot at edge rusher, right? Where you've got good pass rushers on both sides and maybe good run defenders on both sides as well. It doesn't really matter. But I think that if you're kind of stuck in the situation where you have 2 different styles of play potentially, then I think I would rather have those guys on the same side, because your key blocks, your point of attack blocks, need to be executed in a way where everybody's kind of working in concert, and having them play to their strengths is going to increase the likelihood that that's going to work out for you. So yeah, I guess I would have the stylistically similar ones on the same side. So that would be Darrisaw and Davis. I don't know. Darrisaw is really strong and powerful, but like, it's weird for me to be like, yeah, he's stylistically similar to Davis, when Davis will just like punch a guy if he wants to. And Darrisaw is like, yeah, I don't know, man. We could work it out.
Darrisaw didn't hear the snap. He was too busy watching. Mikey P asks, how pumped is Arif for the fall of NDSU?
I would have to have been lamenting the rise of NDSU, and that never happened.
That's That's the quick answer, huh? I don't see it written down in the notes, but you had to have scribbled that down. That's not.
No, wait, no, I definitely just thought of that.
Oh, I'm sure.
I did. No, I had a bunch of answers, and I actually, honestly, I forgot all my other answers, so I had to come up with that one. No, I mean it was fun to watch. Some JV ball this weekend. I guess they're having their tournament, the little championship they've got going on.
Starring your Dukes.
Yeah, my Dukes are, I believe, the top seed, and then the second seed are my Jackrabbits. My Fighting Hawks got in there, and my Bearcats are the third seed. So a really great tournament for my children. Doing really great at the JV level. I mean, my Bearcats just destroyed NDSU. It was really fun to watch. Okay, actually, it was a pretty good game. It legitimately was a good game. The JMU UND game was really good for the first half, and then the second half, JMU just kind of
the bomb. After the bomb, it was over.
Yeah,
actually, there was an offside for a punt after UND made a good stop, and then that offside, that offside, gave JMU the first down. Immediately, they throw a bomb, and the game is over.
That's just good coaching. That's good job, JMU. That's just good coaching. And also, I mean, I say the first half was like good. It was like close, and there was a back and forth. It was pretty sloppy too. There was like 4 turnovers, including one on like fourth. Like it was brutal. But yeah, I don't know. UND was unprepared for the level of success that they had. I think it was like a little tough for them.
Well, and also also one of their wide receivers who they'd been using all year was out for the season or before the game too.
Yeah,
like he'd gotten hurt.
So it was I like that quarterback though. He's if we overuse the word gritty, I think would be appropriate here. But it's interesting. My Salukis and my Jackrabbits played each other. The Jackrabbits won. My Fighting Hawks and my Dukes played each other. The Dukes won. And I think my Dukes are playing my Bearcats, and my Jackrabbits will be playing the Delaware Blue Hens, notable for having Joe Flacco play for them for a year. Also, like Chargers first round draft pick, Nasir Adderley. But yeah, so no matter what, my favorite team is going to be in the finals. We'll see if both my favorite teams are in the finals. But certainly one of the teams that are going to be in the finals are my favorite team. So that's good to see.
It is too bad because we had plans for what was going to happen if NDSU played JMU in the semis. We had plans. Yeah. Like this was going to be a Patreon watch along. Like we were going to bring in analysts to break this game down.
We could have brought in Emery Hunt, who watches the FCS religiously. It would have been fun.
Yeah, we had plans, and NDSU managed to mess them all up.
Yeah, I mean, just that's who they are, right?
Yep. All you had to do was not lose here.
Yeah, well, NDSU never does what you want them to do.
except in this particular instance, where I still think you were hoping for the loss more.
Well, I was happy.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. The Bearcats defense, my Bearcats, I mean, I've been, of course, following them along all year because they're my favorite team. Really phenomenal defense, incredible work. I was a little bit worried because they got that defensive pass interference call, which, if I'm being completely honest, I understand why it was called. But, watching the review, it was a little ticky-tacky, giving them that deep ball. By the way, NDSU scored 3 times off of special teams at first? Their offense was not doing anything. That score is not representative of how good that Bearcats defense was. Holy crap. Some really great pass deflections, too. Wow. NDSU was held to 3.5 yards a carry for 3 quarters or something like that until the quarterback decided to run. Legit, putting the bit aside, that Sam Houston State Bearcats team is pretty good. Holy crap. I would expect them based off of having only watched one game of each of these teams. I mean, all the games because they're my favorite team. I would expect the Bearcats to win it all just based off of that. That was a really impressive performance. But putting the bit back in. Yeah, I expected this from the Bearcats.
Clearly. Let's go to Damian Barrett, who asks, does Teddy's trade help or hurt the ongoing narrative that Dusty O'Connell is alive and well and living in Denver? Initially, I thought the former, but now I feel that the pressure for updates and sightings will be too much, and expect Dusty, quote unquote, to shortly announce he's moving to a new city.
Dusty's like real life Dusty, not trapped in the basement Dusty. Is like a little bit too committed to stuff happening in Denver right now, right? Like
he's got a house and a mortgage and a BMW
and a business, right? He's he has a business. So no, but like we'll figure it out. I think there'll probably be some sightings for sure. I think that Dusty being alive and well and not in James's basement and living in Denver instead of like Crookston or wherever James lives.
I don't live in Crookston.
Close enough. Well, we don't want to give away the true locations, in case somebody attempts to mount a rescue operation for Dusty.
Well, here's the thing: is that theoretically, Dusty might be in North Dakota for a couple days at the end of the month, and so
will he?
So I could take a picture of him in my basement and just make this worse.
That's amazing.
There is a bed in an unused room downstairs. Like it is possible that I could just make this.
It's unused because there's no one being imprisoned.
Nobody is imprisoned in my basement. They're free to leave whenever they want. Why is that weird? Is that weird? I don't know. Ryan asks, does James have a folksy, passive-aggressive story to comp to Packers GM's statement they tried in 2020 to trade up to get Rodgers a weapon, but instead traded up for his replacement when that, quote, didn't work?
Oh, my God. Did you see this story? It was like from Ian Rappaport, and it was also clearly leaked by the Packers front office.
Obviously.
The Packers tried to trade up for Justin Jefferson, and when that didn't work, they tried to trade for Ayuk, and so then they instead decided to draft Jordan Love, which is like, there's not like a way you can tell this story where you come out looking good, honestly. Like T. Higgins and Michael Pittman were also in this draft. Like you could have just drafted T. Higgins had a really underrated rookie year, like a really good rookie year. Especially given that like some Cincinnati Bengals quarterback that wasn't Joe Burrow was thrown to him for a bunch of the season. Like Ryan Finley or something like that. Somebody you've never heard of was thrown to T. Higgins, and he still put up some really great numbers. So I don't know that this helps you, right? Like, can you imagine like if they have this meeting and Aaron Rodgers is like, I can't believe you didn't get me a receiver, and I'm going to have to work with Alan Lazard or Alan Lazard or however you pronounce his name.
Lazard, yeah.
Yeah. And I have to work with Alan Lazard. And then Alan Lazard gets hurt and he has to be like, I have to work with Check's name. Equanimous St. Brown. Okay. And Gutekunst responding, well, we tried trading up for Justin Jefferson, and then we tried trading up for Brandon Ayuk. And then we were out of options at wide receiver.
We tried,
can you imagine?
We tried nothing and we're all out of ideas.
Like this, and like I didn't even mention Gabriel Davis, who had a really great year considering he was playing behind John Brown and Stephon Diggs. Like, what a draft, man. And you're like, I don't know, but after Ayuk, I'm out of it. There were only 2 receivers in the draft. Come on.
No, I wish I had something that worked here, but unfortunately, I am just not as incompetent as the GM.
As the Goot?
Yeah, as Gutekunst. I am not that. I have not done anything that stupid, and I really racked my brain on this one. I went back into like every relationship I could possibly have had, and I was like, how badly? No, I've never like gone shopping for someone and like looked for the thing that they wanted, and they're like, you know what, I really should get. I should just get a bowling ball with my name on it. Like,
you know what I should get? A replacement girlfriend.
Yes, exactly.
I was gonna buy them some roses, but instead I just decided to get a new girlfriend, and then I brought her home and showed her.
Yeah, well, what's the line? May my wife and girlfriend never meet? Like, Tommy Gunn asks, are Jake from State Farm and Jake Kumarau the same person? Is this why Rogers is so upset?
I saw this tweet and I was thinking about floating out a Twitter joke that like maybe Rogers' agent is actually the agent from the State Farm commercials, but it didn't really make sense because Rogers is just releasing these statements out directly.
Yeah, there's nobody. I would be more likely to believe that like a family member that used to star on The Bachelor had something to do with like a release than an actual agent. Like it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Also, for Arif's 1800s cooking corner, what is the trick to getting the bitterness out of candied citrus peels? I tried with great success on clementines, but then I failed horribly with limes. Is it the thickness, the sugar used, boiling time? Help me sort this out before the weekend.
What's incredible is that I knew immediately what resources I needed to go to in order to answer this question. Because I love this channel. It's Townsend and Sons, which does a bunch of 19th century cooking. I realize how this sounds now that I say it out loud. One of my favorite YouTube channels focuses on 19th century cooking. I don't know if you knew this when you asked this question, but I was prepared. And it is a recipe for, of course, I'll link the YouTube. Of course I will. For candied lime peels. So the key, and he talks a couple of times about the key here. So one of the keys is that you need to get the right size limes. They need to be nearly the size of lemons. You can't use key limes. They're too thin. And so when you asked about the thickness, you're kind of hitting on one of the things. They need to be pretty thick. I was surprised. I thought that maybe that including the pith would make them too bitter, but actually James Townsend, I think is his name, the guy that runs the channel, does include the pith. He just cuts off the excess. But what he does in this old-timey recipe is that he changes out the water 3 different times and he boils it until the peel is already tender without any sugar. That is an interesting aspect of it. I did not realize that. And that helps you get out the bitterness, changing out that water. And so you can kind of taste test as you're going, and when it becomes a lot more pliable and it doesn't feel like leather and it doesn't taste bitter anymore, that's when you can move to this step where you're steeping it in sugar water, which is half water, half sugar, and have that for a certain amount of time. And then you put it on a bed of sugar and then directly sugar it. And that's how you get candied lime peels that taste really good, that are not bitter. Great question.
And oddly enough, he was totally prepared for it. Next question is going to be from Don from Ohio, who asks, is the 49ers trading multiple first-round picks to move up and grab a safety at 3 the worst draft pick ever? Or was it the Eagles in 2016 doing the same damn thing for the number 2 pick?
I think the Eagles trading up for a tight end was just wild, honestly. That was nuts to me. I think trading up for a safety, that's pretty bad, but I think the Eagles gave up more for a position that matters less. So I'm going to go with the Eagles' decision here. I think that a safety that's only played like 11 games or whatever it is, that's tough. You don't want to do that, but I understand. It's a little bit easier to scout safeties at the FCS level than it is tight ends. It doesn't make any sense. There were 4 first-round quarterbacks in this draft, and grabbing a safety when you trade up and you clearly need a quarterback, nuts to me. But I would say that the Eagles doing it for the tight end was worse.
Also, for Arif's gaming corner, we are celebrating the fiance's birthday on Sunday. Her family, all vaccinated, is coming over to our house for the first time. What outdoor activities should we play? Obviously, bingo is on the list. I mean, who doesn't love bingo? We have a very large fenced-in backyard.
I feel like this is right up James's alley. My first thought was like lawn darts, but that's actually a terrible idea.
No, that's a perfect idea. Just, safety isn't important at this point. It's dawn. Yes. So,
you're right. It's dawn. Okay, lawn darts. I like
Damian Barrett had a decent idea about the gigantic Jenga. is not a bad idea outside.
Oh, that's good.
Especially,
I mean, honestly,
it could fall and crush you too.
Yeah, anything with a high potential for disaster, I recommend. No, I mean, I like cornhole is pretty fun as a game. I just wish it had a different name. They call it something else outside of the Midwest.
It's
right?
been called. I always heard it as bag toss, and it didn't become cornhole until somebody thought it was funny. Like I've always heard it as bag toss until I turned 21.
I've heard it as cornhole my whole life, and when I was a kid, I was uncomfortable with the name.
I somehow lived a much more sheltered life than you, which is an odd sentence to say, but here we are. I had never heard it as anything other than bag toss until I turned 21. And then in bars, I would hear people refer to it as cornhole. I was like, what are you? I know what that is, but what are you talking about? Like, I don't know what's happening here. Other than that, how else can we get Don killed in his own backyard accidentally? Did I say that out loud again? I didn't mean to.
I mean, we could probably get them to organize races on slip and slides.
Yeah, let's, Don's over 50. That won't break a hip or anything. Slip and slide's a fantastic idea, no matter what the weather is.
Yeah.
I think that's a good place to start. Oh, and just make sure to use charcoal when you're cooking, because it's your fiance's birthday, and she deserves the best. Yeah, let's.
She knows it too,
and she knows it too, despite the fact that she has chosen to marry you. So that is going to be it for that. Actually ended up a bit too harsh. I'm not going to take it out, but it still felt a bit too harsh.
Yeah, well, I feel bad about that. Not enough to do anything.
there's enough edit points in this episode already. I'm not going to go back and take care of this too. But that's going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Arif, you have a million articles on the draft. Where can they find them?
Yeah, I'm not even going to list them all. You can find them at theathletic.com/ArifHassan NFL. I'll have scouting reports. I've got a bunch of stuff about reactions to the draft. It's obviously all about the draft. I've got grades on all the teams, and people are mad at the grades, so join them.
Grab your pitchfork and head over to theathletic.com. Fantastic. All right, that is going to be it for this week's episode. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll be back here soon with more content. Again, just as a recap from the beginning of the episode, if you would like to donate to the show, instead this week, please head over to this GoFundMe link that we are going to be putting up on the Daily Norseman and over at in the actual description of the show on your phone or device or however you're listening to this. So you'll be able to find the GoFundMe for Craig Theed. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much, and please remember to please punch reality right in the face. And we will be back soon. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's official Vikings blog, at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Stitcher, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. You can also find his written work at theathletic.com. I am your podcast host and producer, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at BigMono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or you can make a recurring monthly contribution by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. A donation of $3.50 per month does get you bonus material from the show and much more. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.